I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to the July 9th, 2020 meeting of the City of Walnut Creek Planning Commission. This meeting is by teleconference only. Please refer to the end of tonight's agenda to review options for participating in the meeting. The notice of teleconference meetings is pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N-2920 dated March 17, 2020. City commissioners may participate via teleconference. Teleconference locations are not open to the public pursuant to California Governor Executive Order N-29-20. With that, I'd like to make sure everyone has the appropriate sign-in information to tonight's meeting. Who would like to participate? It's webinar ID 989-0983-9048, and that's password 615856. And with that, I will turn to the Commission Secretary and ask that you take roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe you're muted. Commissioner Pickett.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Ward.
Here.
Commissioner Weiser.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kerselik.
Here.
And Chair Lezak.
Here.
For the record, Commissioner Strongman is absent. We do have 6 members present, and we may conduct business.
Okay, so before we move into the consent calendar items, I'll ask the Commission Secretary if he has any items of discussion that he would like to bring forward to the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify for the record. I want to acknowledge that I made an error. Apologies to all. Relative to the posting under the public hearing portion of our meeting this evening, there are 2 items listed. The first, the Sustainability Action Plan. The second is the Mount Diablo Mixed Use Project. The Sustainability Action Plan did not require a public hearing notice, and that's fine. And it should have been placed under considerations, number 5 on your agenda. I mistakenly placed it under number 4, part 4, public hearings. It is the option of the chair and the commission to leave the order as presented in the agenda, or if they wish to reorder the agenda such that the Sustainability Action Plan is placed properly under considerations. I will note it's not mandated, but I did want to highlight that error and apologize for the oversight and provide the opportunity if the commission wishes to reorder the meeting order as presented, or if you wish to proceed as presented, which would have sustainability action as 4A and the Mount Diablo project is 4B.
Is there some reason that we need to do that, or does it change the public requirements or something?
Apologies. Thank you for that question. It does not. It is certainly the commission's opportunity and right to order the agenda as they see fit. I just wanted to point out the error because I would not want someone to believe that because the sustainability item, was under the public hearing portion, that it somehow required a public hearing notice that was not sent. It was not required to have a public hearing notice, and therefore the commission can elect to move it later in the evening, or they can take it first as presented under the agenda. I just wanted to clarify that. It's not a major point. I just wanted to be, for the record, clear that I made an error.
Okay, so just to be annoying, so that it's no big deal, first of all, but does staff have a preference as to the order of the items?
I would offer that the order as presented would be, I think that's how it's been posted. That may be the public's perception of the order of events this evening. And so, subject to the chair or the commission's confirmation, we'd like to proceed as presented on the agenda this evening.
Okay, well, I'll let the chair decide what to do there.
I have no real preference. I always like to move forward with public hearings as soon as possible to try to bring the applicants forward so they can move on with their evening. But I do appreciate staff's concern that it was noticed to the public in this way, and there may be members of the public wishing to comment on the later item that haven't joined us yet. So unless there's a strong preference one way or the other, I'm going to go ahead and suggest we keep the agenda as was posted to the public, and we'll pretend that the Sustainability Action Plan was always meant to be a public hearing, and we'll take it as in that section.
Thank you.
So seeing no other comments, we'll go ahead and move forward with our agenda as is posted. And we'll move into the first item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. I don't see any items on the agenda for the consent calendar. Commission Secretary, are there any items at this time?
There are none.
All right, so we'll go ahead and move to the public communications section of the hearing. As stated earlier, this meeting is by teleconference only. This is the opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda, and it gives folks the opportunity to speak on any items on the agenda, but to do so, they'll need to use the raise hand feature or *9, I believe, on their telephone to indicate to staff that they're interested in making a comment. So with all of that, we'll go ahead and ask, does any member of the public wish to provide public comment at this time?
I'm checking over our list of attendees, and if you'll provide me one moment, we have a little bit of feedback there. Looking through the list of attendees, I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand, nor is there any indication from those calling in that they wish to speak by pressing *9 on their receiver. So I would surmise there's no public comment during this portion of the meeting.
Okay, so hearing no public comment, we'll go ahead and close the public comment period, and we will move on to the public hearings portion of the agenda. The first item on tonight's agenda, item 4A, is the project's sustainability action plan. I'll ask staff to provide the presentation.
Good evening, Chair Lezak and commissioners. We're just going to bring up the slides. Okay, so my name is Kara Batista Rao. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator and Housing Analyst in the Community and Economic Development Department, and I'll be starting off the presentation tonight. Next slide. We're going to do a quick introduction to the Sustainability Action Plan, go over the outreach and engagement strategy, and the timeline for the project. And then we'll move into a portion of the presentation where we'll present information and ask for the Commission's feedback. We'll go over the vision, sustainability indicators, greenhouse gas inventory and forecast, and the vulnerability assessment. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm the project manager for the city. And we also have here tonight Sam Bowman, who's a Civic Spark Fellow with the AmeriCorps program, who's working with the city. Our main project consultant is PlaceWorks. And tonight we have Tammy Seal, who's the project manager, and Eli Crispy, who's the assistant project manager. They're both available to take questions at the end, and Eli will give a portion of the presentation. Next. So Walnut Creek adopted its climate action plan in 2012, and it set a goal of addressing climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions 15% below 2005 levels by the year 2020. And the city's made a lot of progress since then, and we have an opportunity to really build on what we've done. Next, please. In addition, the state has been very active to address climate change and has recently passed a number of new pieces of legislation. One is SB 32, which is setting a new statewide goal for 2030 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels. The state's climate change scoping plan also provides recommendations for what local governments can do to reduce their emissions in the future. And SB 379 is also a new law that requires cities to address climate change adaptation in future general plan updates. And what that means is really assessing the impacts of climate change through a vulnerability assessment and then developing policies to be more prepared for climate change. Next, please. So in February 2019, the City Council selected their council priorities for the fiscal year 18-20 budget cycle. And one of the priorities that they selected was to update and expand our existing climate action plan. We're calling this new plan the Sustainability Action Plan, and it will have kind of three main topics. One is the Climate Action Plan update that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions to address climate change. The next is climate adaptation to help meet those new state requirements. And the third, council asked us to broaden it beyond just climate change to address more sustainability topics. So this can include equity, topics like waste prevention, air quality, and other environmental issues. So it's a chance to really holistically address environmental issues in Walnut Creek and be aligned with state policy. We also want the plan to help implement the general plan. The general plan has a number of different goals related to protecting the environment, everything from supporting green development to water and energy efficiency and increasing transit ridership. And again, the work that we're doing here along climate adaptation can help meet new state requirements for general plans, safety elements. And then finally, this plan is an opportunity for us to help streamline environmental review for development projects. Next slide. So I'm going to briefly touch on our public outreach and engagement strategy. We had hoped to do a number of different in-person events in the spring, and of course that had to be changed due to the pandemic. So we're moving everything online for the future. We are having our first community-wide virtual workshop on July 29th and invite the public to attend. It will be recorded for the future for those who can't make it and put online. In addition to tonight's Planning Commission meeting, we'll be having a Transportation Commission meeting on July 16th. We are engaging with a number of different stakeholder groups virtually, and all of the information on how to get involved is on our project website, walnut-creek.org/SAP. Next, please. And in terms of the project timeline, we're looking at about a year to a year and a half for this plan to be developed and adopted. We're currently in phase 1 of the project, which is lasting from winter of 2019 through this summer. And phase 1 really involves project initiation and visioning, as well as sharing some early data analysis. Phase 2 of the project is expected to last into the fall and is focused on policy and strategy development. So working to brainstorm what strategies the community is interested in, what new targets we want to set for the future, and how to prioritize them. And phase 3 of the project is expected to take place next winter. Phase 3 is really about preparing the Sustainability Action Plan document, doing environmental review, and then going through the public review process and the adoption process. So throughout the project, we'll be returning to this commission and asking for your input on different goals and objectives, the types of policies and tracking metrics that we use for the project, as well as to provide comments and feedback on the draft plan itself. So I'll just pause there for a minute and see if there are any questions on the overall Sustainability Action Plan project.
I have a question. Where's my hand? There we go. Let's see, one of the things you said is the goal was to get by 2020, which we're in, to get below 2005 levels by 15%. And maybe you mentioned it and I didn't catch it, but have we achieved that?
We are on track to meeting that goal, and we'll be covering that more later in the presentation.
Great, thank you.
So I had a question too. I had Bob's question, which you've answered. Thank you. And I also just wondered if the budget challenges that the city's facing right now are going to affect our ability to complete and carry out this plan, or if it's already all funded.
The development of the plan is funded. Later, if the plan is adopted, there will be, additional funding needs to implement the plan, but we have enough budget to do the project. Okay. I'm going to keep moving to the next slide if there's no other questions. So we're just transitioning into the next portion of the presentation where we'll be presenting some topics for the commission's feedback. And we wanted to start with the draft vision and objective statement. So I won't read it. It was in the agenda report, but staff from several different departments got together to help kick off the project and drafted a vision statement for the Sustainability Action Plan. We were thinking about what would a sustainable Walnut Creek look like in 2030? What's exciting about sustainability? What other co-benefits might there be to addressing these environmental concerns? And if you go to the next slide. We also went to City Council in February with this draft vision and objective statement, and they refined it a bit. So we'll be sharing this out to the commissions, to the public, and to stakeholders, and asking for their thoughts on how this vision resonates with them. And next slide, please. Tonight, we're asking the commission to give us some feedback on whether there's anything missing from the vision statement, if there are things that resonate with you or not, and if it reflects a vision of Walnut Creek's environmental status in 2030 that you'd like to see. And we'll be using this vision statement throughout the project to help us gauge if we're moving in the right direction, if the policies and strategies we're developing are going to help us get to that vision in the future. So I'll pause there for feedback. Yes.
Okay, so we're giving feedback right now on the draft vision statement that was in the. Okay, so I had a couple comments about that. First of all, I didn't. Starting at the end, basically, I didn't understand what disaster-free environment meant. So maybe you could speak to that. I feel like we're in the middle of a disaster right now, so I didn't know whether it was just natural disasters like fires or whether it was something else we were talking about.
Sorry.
You want to do one by one? Okay, go ahead. Why do you?
I'll just answer that first.
Yeah.
So really, when we're talking about climate change, we are going to see a lot of different climate hazards that are related to climate change, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the presentation, but you can think about things like more droughts, more wildfires as a result of the changing climate. And so that's what we were trying to capture in that vision statement, that we'd like a future without those kinds of severe climate-related hazards.
Okay, so that wasn't entirely clear to me from that, but I'm not sure exactly how to fix it. There were a couple things I thought were maybe alluded to, but left out a little bit in this. One of them was kind of the idea of there being a business partnership between the businesses in our community and the effect that has on climate action. So maybe a little bit more robust description of a partnership between businesses and the city and citizens and everybody living together. I felt like that component was kind of left out of the, I mean, it says live, work, and play. So I guess that kind of the work part kind of gets it in there, but it seemed like that was a missing component in there. And additionally, there's no reference to using technology to the greatest extent possible to assist with mitigating the effects of climate change and meeting our goals. And I wondered if that should be more explicit with regard to that. If we're going to have a vision, maybe that's one way that we're going to implement the vision, but that should be there. And my third point of things that were kind of left out is I appreciated the equal access reference, and I thought that was really, really important, but I was wondering if the social justice component of climate change and how that fits together should be more explicit again in the vision, because there's definitely issues of access to clean water, clean air. All these different things are definitely not always afforded on an equal basis. And I think maybe a little bit more, again, explicit idea that in planning for different elements that we do need to include a more explicit social justice vision with regard to climate change, because I think that there's a disparate impact on people of lower income and certain other elements of the community that are affected by climate change, not just all of us equally. So let's see, let me look at my notes just carefully. Yeah, I mean, I think that was it. The only question was whether public health should be more explicitly added as well. Obviously, clean air and clean water have effects on that, but I didn't know whether that should be something that should be, if we have equal access to clean air, fresh water, is good health a kind of general thing that we want to add that is one of our target goals to add. And I'm sorry for all these topics without specific wording, but I thought that maybe there were some things that needed to be added in there, or perhaps the categories need to be retitled a little bit.
Thank you for that feedback. We can certainly consider all of that.
Okay, thank you.
And I saw some more. I can't see everyone's hand, but I saw some.
Bob Pickett. I am confused, I guess, by the reference to equal access, particularly as it relates to the benefits of clean air. I just can't imagine there being a disparity in the city of Walnut Creek to the air that I breathe, whatever corner of our city I'm in. Likewise with fresh water. I mean, we are the beneficiaries of, good water systems. We have East Bay Mud and Contra Costa water, and one's a little better than the other, but I mean, what are we trying to accomplish when we say equal access to fresh water? Don't we all have that?
Well, I mean, this is a vision statement, so it's kind of setting what we want to achieve as a community. So if we're already there, that's great. That's something we'd want to maintain. On the air quality issue, there are some issues in terms of along the freeways and in the downtown. If you look at different air quality maps, those areas do tend to have a little bit worse air quality. So again, it's just something to strive for, and it's a vision for the future.
So what would the goal there be? To improve the air quality along the freeway, or to move the people away from the freeway to somewhere else?
Well, I think we'll get into more of those kinds of strategies in the next phase, but you could look at things like cleaner transportation that doesn't have the same types of air quality emissions or pollution issues. And that could be anything from electric vehicles to walking and biking. I think there are a lot of strategies to achieve cleaner air downtown and near the freeways that are within our reach already.
Okay, and are people's access restricted in any way in the city of Walnut Creek, that we would need to do something to give equal access to everybody? The equal access, I just struggle with that terminology. I just think it's inappropriate. I think there may be a better way to phrase that. I understand what the objective is. We want everybody in the city of Walnut Creek to benefit from all these things, but nowhere are we prohibiting anybody from access to those things. And I think everybody has free movement around the city of Walnut Creek to access those things. So it's that equal access, those two words, I don't think accomplish what our vision might be, but that's my 2 cents worth.
We can certainly think about how to phrase that.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Just really quick, and some good points brought up already, but I was also kind of wrapped around the axle on the term disaster-free environment. I'm not sure technically if there's a way to guarantee what a disaster-free environment is, because disasters by their very nature, at least natural ones, aren't avoidable. So maybe, and I don't know if we're supposed to get into wordsmithing at this level or what have you, but it might be disaster prepared environment or something to that effect, or acknowledge something that we're prepared for it, but not disaster free. That's a pretty lofty vision.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I could make a few comments. I also had some problems with the disaster-free environment. I wasn't quite sure what that was, or how to guarantee it. I also was not entirely sure about the resilient environment. I suppose I'm not sure if that means that it's resilient in the face of disasters. It's not quite disaster-free, or if it indicated something different than that. I also had I come at the equal access question a little bit differently from Commissioner Pickett. It seems to me that there are things like clean air and fresh water and renewable energy resources that you can give equal access by simply making them universally available. I think kind of getting to that. I'm a little less certain how you do that with open space and multimodal transportation. Those are much more location dependent, and whether you have equal access by simply providing them if you can get to them, or whether you actually affirmatively take some action to allow more universal ability to get to them, either through transportation or pathways or whatever. So again, I'm not exactly sure how that works. I'm not sure equal access is exactly the right terminology there.
Yeah, we can look at that some more. And just to circle back to your question about resilience, I think actually the crisis we're in now with the pandemic is a good example of resilience. So you're thinking about things like the rebound program or other ways to help the community bounce back more quickly. And the same kind of idea is that resilience idea with climate change. So if there are more wildfires or there are more droughts, are there policies or different strategies you can have in place to help the community recover more quickly and ideally to recover in a better way? And that's kind of the idea behind resilience. And I think some of this terminology is maybe more common among the climate people, and we can do a better job of defining what we mean when we talk about disasters and resilience and make it more clear.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to hand it off at this point to Eli, who will go over a lot of the results of the data analysis, and there will be some more opportunities for input.
Thank you, Kara, and thank you, members of the commission. I'm going to walk through some of the technical work that we've done so far on the Sustainability Action Plan and give you a little overview of this. The first topic is the topic of sustainability indicators. And these are the metrics that will help Walnut Creek track progress on sustainability topics. And this will make it easier for the city to monitor and report on these efforts. The indicators will include topics related to greenhouse gas reduction and to climate adaptation and resilience, but they will also go beyond those topics and look more broadly and more holistically at the field of sustainability, incorporating items such as air quality, equity, and other issues not directly covered by greenhouse gas reduction and climate adaptation. We want the indicators to be simple and to be streamlined for city staff to track. So we are taking care to select indicators that have readily available data, that are meaningful, and meet these other criteria for an efficient process. There are 6 types of indicators, or 6 topics shown here. And then within each of these topics, we are recommending a handful of indicators, 4, 6, 7 or so. Each of them would be associated with specific implementation strategies and potential sources of data that city staff can go to get information on the indicators. And these are examples of some of the potential draft indicators under some of those topics that I just presented. We want to make sure that the indicators themselves, again, broadly capture the full spectrum of sustainability issues that are facing the city, and that would be consistent with some of the city's sustainability goals and objectives that we were going over earlier. So again, these are just examples of potential indicators There was a longer list of potential indicators in the associated memo. So at this time, we can take a pause and see if there are any questions or comments related to those indicators. We are looking for any input on the proposed indicators or the metrics, particularly on fields of transportation, building, and community health and awareness. And for these topics, we are also asking if members of the commission have any alternate or additional focus areas that should be tracked under this program that would align with the draft vision statement and might better reflect some of your comments on that statement and are consistent with the definition of sustainability. I see a hand.
Yeah, if I could comment regarding the buildings category. There are three metrics that are listed there. One of them is reduction in overall municipal, residential, commercial natural gas consumption. And reduction implies that you have a baseline, an actual usage baseline, and you see how much you can bring that down. And that I like that metric. It's a good one. It's easy to see what's happening. I'm not so happy about the first one, electricity use and natural gas use avoided through energy efficient measures. That suggests that this is a new use, new buildings or new energy use. And the difficulty there is your numerator is sort of what you're actually using. The denominator is what you think you would have been using, which is a very amorphous idea, very, very difficult to pin down what you would have been using, and easily manipulated depending on what results you want to get. I think the much better way to do that is simply to, rather than the energy avoided, is to indicate the energy used, whether that's energy used per square foot or per housing unit or however you want to do it. It's you can compare it to what's in older buildings or more recently constructed buildings versus new buildings or new energy uses. But rather than trying to figure out how much you didn't use from a baseline, which is really not well defined, I think using actual usage would be a better metric for that. And then the last one, the new construction installing all electric equipment. I think that needs to be meshed with how that electricity is generated. There's sort of an assumption here that we're moving, I think it's true, we're moving in California at least, to a more renewable, even to an all renewable source for electricity. But we're not there yet, and we probably won't be for some time. And I think the move from what's mainly gas appliances to electric appliances makes sense depending on the source of the electricity. So I think that has to be folded into that metric as well.
Thank you for that. I appreciate those comments. And certainly take a look at those.
I have a general question on transportation. It actually applies to all these, but just so I understand the purpose of these metrics, if we take the example of transportation, number of total housing units within 1 mile radius of BART.
Mm-hmm.
So the process is you inventory those at X and you establish a goal of what gain, and then you monitor it to see how close we're coming to that goal. Is that how that works?
Yes, there could be a goal that could be set, or it could be sort of a floating target without a specific end goal in mind, with the general purpose of increasing the amount of housing units or the percent of housing units that are within that radius of BART stations.
Okay. On the and this is a global question, and probably not. It's probably a little bit higher level than what we're talking about right now, but the issue on eliminating gas and going to electricity. I would suspect that we aren't anywhere near having the capability to generate the additional electricity that we would need to replace all of the gas usage in the city of Walnut Creek. And so how do you build that into a timetable or into reasonable expectations? If you're taking something away, you got to add something back in. We need to know that the resources are there to add back in. How do you do that on a global scale on something we're looking at a finite level in the city of Walnut Creek?
Well, I can't speak to the global scale. I can say that this is something that is certainly a growing movement statewide, and particularly in the Bay Area, where increased restrictions on the use of new natural gas in combination with greater energy efficiency standards for electricity in new buildings is achieving some pretty significant benefits as far as the amount of new electricity that is needed. The state has indicated their goals of moving towards zero net energy for all new buildings. And as a part of that, they are encouraging the use of increased amount of electricity as opposed to natural gas in new construction. So I think a program like this would certainly require some greater movement and greater effort by not only Walnut Creek, but also by regional and statewide entities. But we propose that as an opportunity to make sure that the city is able to capitalize and to benefit from the trends that the state is moving towards.
When I'm talking about global, I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about a larger scale, perhaps just California, or more likely the Western states, because I think our energy grids, our electricity grids cross state lines. But I'm not sure if we need to build something in here that we need to monitor the capabilities of providing the electricity that we're saying is going to substitute something else. We can't do that if we don't have the resource to draw on to make the substitution. So somehow I think that just needs to be considered when we're looking at eliminating natural gas. Do we have something to replace it? And the rate at which we replace natural gas would be a factor of the speed at which we can develop replacement resources.
Bob, if I might comment on that, when I joined the MCE board a few years ago, that was one of my questions was, what if this really takes off and people want to do a lot of renewable, willing to pay a couple of bucks for it, where will we get it? And their answer was, it's out there. There are people, when they go out to look for contracts for large scale solar or wind, it's available. And if the demand goes up, the supply, they say, will be there. There's a lot of potential for that. There's also the factor that with wind and solar, they continue to get cheaper, whereas fossil fuels and other resources can get more expensive. And that line, those lines crossed a few years ago, and they're continuing to move in that same direction. The other thing is that dispersed solar, rooftop solar, new buildings and old buildings, almost every building has a roof. So there's a huge potential for, every house to provide its own renewable energy. So there actually is a pretty substantial potential. It's worth, noting that the supply has to be there to use it. But I think the fact that there's a lot of indications that it will be there.
So you have the confidence that our economy and our technology will be able to provide that resource when we need it.
Yeah, I do.
Thanks. It's helpful to know.
Eli, I'm going to jump in on you, Bob, and have a slightly different comment that I think is related to some of the other comments the commissioners have made. And I think that is, we talked about your vision statement, and I agree that, the vision statement is a very large, encompassing statement that maybe isn't terribly clear, but that's not often, shocking for a vision statement. The piece of this that I'm missing is the step between the vision statement and the indicators, and that would be what I would consider to be the goals. And to me, the goals are where you look at your vision and you start to say, okay, how am I going to achieve? What are the specific things that are my priorities that I'm going to use to achieve this vision? And for me, one of the major things about dealing with climate change is trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the best thing that we can be doing right now is trying to move into electric cars. And of course, if we had a natural gas or propane and some of these other hydrogen fuel cell cars, things like that. But right now, the electric car movement is starting to, we're starting to get to the point where batteries make this, and the cost of batteries make this a real thing. As much as I like walking and biking, and I'm very pleased that the upside of a pandemic is that people have learned to bicycle again and to like to be outside walking. But I don't believe that we're going to solve the greenhouse gas problem by moving people out of their cars into bikes and walking. I think we need to move them gasoline powered cars into electric cars. And then over time, all these other things can happen. So for me, moving to electric cars is a huge priority. And I really like your transportation indicator that's counting the number of registered cars. But I think you need to be having a goal that relates to that before you really focus on that indicator. I think electric cars is a hugely powerful thing, in part because rooftop solar is such a great opportunity for us right now. We know that the state has driven all new homes, most new buildings will have rooftop solar required as part of the new energy code. There's a lot of opportunity for other homes, older homes in the community to get rooftop solar. And if you have rooftop solar, why would you not have electric car chargers, and why would you not have an electric car? So for me, that makes sense. And the other goal that I would like to see as part of the city and perhaps a public-private partnership is to try and significantly improve the number of electric car chargers all through the city of Walnut Creek, the state, the country, the world, because you can't have a ton of new electric cars on the road if you don't have infrastructure to serve them. And so another thing that I think we should be having as a goal and an indicator in transportation is not just electric cars, but it's electric car chargers. And then along with everything that I've been saying, I think that the building metric of having how many homes have electric solar on their roof, I think is a very useful indicator. I don't think it's a terribly useful indicator to talk about how many homes are within 1 mile of the BART station. That number is only going to change in a very small way incrementally, and it's already part of our general plan. That's not something that we need to focus on as a major goal. But I do think that some of these other things are, and if we can move people out of gas cars into electric cars, potentially that helps the folks who are living along the freeway, because now that addresses that part of the vision statement. So, that's kind of how I think you need to step back and identify some goals that will get you from your vision statement to your indicators, and it will help you understand whether you've got indicators that are really useful and helpful, or whether you're tracking indicators that are essentially, not really going to yield much. Thank you.
But thank you. I appreciate all those comments, and we will definitely relook at these in response to that. If there are no further comments on the indicators, I will move on with the next section of the presentation, which is talking about the greenhouse gas inventory. And this is an assessment of the emissions that are attributed to Walnut Creek. We are accounting for the greenhouse gas emissions from both community-wide activities, which are the activities of residents businesses, visitors, and so on. And then separately, we are accounting for the emissions from the city's own municipal government operations. For both of these, there are 2 years that we are assessing emissions for. There is a 2005 inventory, which sets the baseline conditions, and that's the baseline year that is in the city's current existing climate action plan. And then we are also preparing a 2017 inventory, which has shown the progress that the city has made since that baseline year. And these are the results of that community-wide inventory. As you can see, emissions have declined a total of 27% from 2017 levels compared to the 2005 level. That includes a 35% decline in the energy use, electricity and natural gas in the city's homes and businesses. As Kara mentioned, the city has a target of reducing emissions 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. So at this point, the city appears well positioned to meet and even exceed that 15% below target. These are the results of the city operations inventory, and it does show a 4% decline from 2005 levels to the 2017 results, but that does come with a pretty large caveat. The 2017 inventory includes multiple sources of greenhouse gas emissions that were not included in the 2005 inventory. So for example, emissions from employee commute, which are shown as the large teal bar in the middle of the 2017 side of the graph, those emissions were not counted in 2005. The inclusion of these additional greenhouse gas emissions is entirely optional under the guidance documents that we are following. They do provide a more complete picture and provide the city with more opportunities to reduce emissions, which is why we are recommending their inclusion, but they are not required under the guidance documents. The city does have a goal of reducing municipal emissions 39% below 2005 levels. And I'll point out that if you only count the sources that are included in the 2005 inventory and don't consider the ones that are added in for 2017, then rather than declining 4%, emissions have declined 35% if you look at those specific sources. And that would put the city on a good track to meet the 2020 target. And with that, I can pause and take any questions on the inventory results.
I have a question. On page 7 of the staff report, dealing with greenhouse gas inventories, it says the community greenhouse gas inventory for 2017. So the 3 top sources of emissions are transportation, 57%, residential energy, 15%, and non-residential energy, 15%. And it says natural gas is responsible for 74% of all community energy emissions in 2017.
Yes.
Something's amiss there, since the amount of natural gas in the transportation sector is quite small. And that's 57% of emissions. So I'm not sure how you get to 74% if you exclude 57% of it. Not sure whether the year is different or they're not. I'm trying to compare apples and oranges, but it looks like there's something that doesn't line up.
I can clarify that point. The 74% that we're referring to is only within the energy sector. So 74% of emissions associated with energy use are the result of natural gas, not 74% of all citywide emissions.
And when you say energy use, I mean the three categories you give there are transportation, residential energy, and non-residential energy. Those are all energy use. I'm still confused.
The energy use sector should include electricity use and natural gas. It does not include gasoline or diesel or any other transportation fuel, unless it's including electricity use from electric vehicles.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, so what it's trying to say in the staff report is that over time, if you look at electricity and natural gas emissions from electricity are going down and natural gas emissions have increased over time, just for the energy sector.
Well, okay. I apologize for the detail. I've worked in energy use for 15 years. When you say are all community energy emissions, gasoline is energy, diesel is energy. All of those things are energy. So if you just mean natural gas and electricity, you should say that. Otherwise, it's very confusing.
Thank you. Appreciate that point. We can always clarify those.
I have a question on the same issue. This is kind of admitting my ignorance. What kind of emissions do you get from electricity?
So an increasingly small number now, but some emission or some sources of emissions still come from, some sources of electricity still come from the burning of fossil fuels, predominantly natural gas. So most of the
city of
emissions
Walnut Creek
within
the city.
No, we're looking at electricity that is used in the city.
Okay,
that is the source of these emissions.
Okay, so if somebody turns on a light switch and they're using electricity and it uses a certain amount of power, you're saying a small percentage of the power that ends up being generated that's used comes from something that emits greenhouse gases somewhere else in the state.
That is correct.
Okay, and then one other question. As we monitor these things, we're going to have a big blip or a big dip or something like that due to COVID-19. We've already seen a lot of statistics citing how much our air quality has improved due to the lack of vehicular traffic. So, how, when are we? I know you don't know when we're going to get back to normal. So I won't ask you that question. But if you know, let me know. But how are you going to skirt around that? It would seem to me that we probably won't get meaningful information for another 1 or 2 years.
Absolutely. There's always a bit of a lag with these, with assessing these emissions. We are only just now, within the past week or so, being able to assess emissions from the calendar year 2019. So it will be a little while before we see the full results from 2020. I certainly agree this is such an abnormal year that it's unlikely we can really count it in any representative sense. All I can say is I think we will have to see to when and to what extent activity returns to normal, whatever that would be, and sort of discard or set aside these very abnormal years just because they're so unrepresented, and we'll have to use some more normal baseline to determine what emissions look like at the present. We haven't gotten to that point yet.
Of course, thank you.
Any other questions associated with the greenhouse gas emissions inventory?
I have one on I guess the next section on greenhouse gas forecast.
Yeah. I'm about to go over the forecast. So the forecast is a projection of greenhouse gas emissions for future years. In this forecast, it assumes that no action is taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for future years at the federal, state, regional, or local level. So the only the only factor behind the change in emissions in the forecast comes from changes in the city's demographics and any changes in city operations. And again, this is assuming no efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we do this as a way of setting a sort of future foundation against which we can measure greenhouse gas reduction activities. So these are the results of that forecast for the community-wide level. So again, if no action is taken to reduce emissions, relative to 2017 levels, we are projecting a 1% increase in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and a 10% increase in emissions by 2050. And that includes a 12% increase in building energy use, electricity and natural gas in the residential and non-residential environments. These are the results of the city operations inventory, which shows a similar pattern. If no action is taken to reduce emissions, city operations emissions are projected to grow 4% by 2030 relative to 2017 levels, increasing to an 8% above 2017 levels by the calendar year 2050. But of course, to say that there are no actions being taken is already a bit of a meaningless statement. There is action that has been taken and will continue to be taken going forward. So we do want to take those actions into account. These are what we refer to as existing actions or planned actions in some cases. And the sustainability plan will assess the greenhouse gas reduction benefits from these actions and in effect credit the city for the reductions achieved by these programs, at least the ones that apply locally. And this will allow the city to move closer to its greenhouse gas reduction targets. It means that there will be less need for new action going forward, although some new policies in the Sustainability Action Plan will of course still be required. These existing actions include state efforts such as the Renewables Portfolio Standard and the Title 24 Energy Efficiency Standards for new construction. It also includes regional and local actions such as increased enrollment for MCE, construction of new bike lanes, retrofits for energy efficiency to existing structures in Walnut Creek, and there are a number of others that we are looking at as well. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or input on the forecast or on anything else on the greenhouse gas emissions side of things.
If I can start off, the two things. Well, the first is the business as usual forecast.
Mm-hmm.
If, as I think that what this says is that if Walnut Creek doesn't do anything special, that the energy use, the emissions will grow along with the demographic.
Right. If Walnut Creek does nothing, and also if the state and the region do nothing.
Right. Nobody does anything.
Right.
But what that doesn't account for, and it's pretty significant, is the fact that in 2030 or in 2030, we're going to be replacing buildings from the 1940s with buildings in the 2020s. Just by the fact that A, they're newer, and B, there's already a plethora of energy requirements for new buildings that that replacement of that infrastructure is going to have a significant reduction in both energy use and in emissions. The same is true even more so of vehicles, because they turn over faster. And we're going to be replacing new vehicles built in the 1990s or the 2000s with vehicles built in the 2020s. That's going to there's higher standards, there's more better technology, more electric charging stations, etc. Just without Walnut Creek or the state or the national government doing anything, there's going to be a replacement of much less efficient vehicles with more efficient vehicles. So I think that even the business as usual forecast is going to be more reduction than being accounted for. The second one to look at was I'm not sure I understand or at least believe it. You indicate, and this is on page 8 of the staff report, the 2020 forecast, and we're looking at the base level of 2005. The emissions are forecast to be down 33%. So that's a good job, and it's up an A- kind of reduction over those 15 years. Over the next 10 years, 2030, it'll be down 43% with respect to 2005 level. Obviously, the low-hanging fruit to get the first 15 years, so the next 10 not as productive. It's a little disappointing, it's only 10% less. But that's still. When you get to the 2030, 2050, only 3% less at that point. And again, in those 2 decades, you're going to be replacing a lot of old equipment with new equipment And even if there's no huge technological breakthroughs, or very concentrated political impetus to reduce emissions, they're going to be reduced anyway. And it seems to me, I'm not sure how the forecasts were made, but I'm kind of skeptical that that one couldn't do better.
I appreciate that. I heard your audio stream get slightly garbled during the middle of that, but if I may, I think what you were trying to say is to point out that as buildings and as vehicles are replaced, they will naturally be more energy efficient just by virtue of being newer, even if no action is taken. Is that what you were getting at?
Correct.
Yes, absolutely. That is true. We are aware of that. Just given the way that the recommendations are for how these business as usual forecasts are prepared, that benefit is not taken into account. These are meant to show really sort of a worst case scenario. So it is assumed as virtue of that a building or vehicle would be replaced with one exactly as efficient as the one that came before it. We recognize that is not a realistic way of how replacements are done, but it is meant to show sort of the worst case scenario if there were no policies that related to this type of work.
The baker has to make a comeback.
Any other comments on the inventory or forecast? Well, with that, we can move forward to the final section of our presentation, which is talking about the work that the Sustainability Action Plan will take to improve climate resilience. And the foundation of this work is what's referred to as a vulnerability assessment. A vulnerability assessment is a technical analysis that describes how climate change related hazards such as wildfire and extreme heat are expected to change in the area around Walnut Creek. Usually the frequency and or intensity of these hazards is expected to get worse with climate change. The vulnerability assessment identifies how people and what we're calling community assets are most at risk from these climate change related hazards and how susceptible they are on a 5-point scale to these different hazard conditions. The vulnerability assessment for Walnut Creek builds on a similar assessment that was prepared at the county level. So we're trying to be efficient and be consistent with what other local partners are doing. But the one for Walnut Creek is, of course, tailored and made specifically applicable to this community. As Kara noted earlier on, the state now requires that vulnerability assessments be included in safety elements. So the city will be able to incorporate the results of this vulnerability assessment into its safety element when it does an update of its general plan in the future. These are the hazards that we are including in the vulnerability assessment, these 8 categories. We are looking not only at the more common sort of acute natural disasters like floods and wildfires, but we also want to make sure that the vulnerability assessment is looking at some of the more chronic but still hazardous conditions that are associated with climate change, such as air quality impacts or drought. We are assessing 5 different categories of populations and assets in the vulnerability assessment, shown here. And then within each of these categories, there are a number of specific population groups and community assets that are being included. So for each of the populations and each of the assets within these 5 categories, we will assess their vulnerability to each of those 8 hazards. So at the end of the day, what we end up with is 8 different scores for every population and every community asset that is being assessed. And those scores reflect how vulnerable that population or that asset is to those 8 different climate-related hazards that I showed on the previous slide. So the results of the vulnerability assessment are quite extensive, but here are the main takeaways. We find that there are several populations that face increased health risks associated with climate-related hazards, both the acute and the more chronic climate change impacts. There's significant potential for damage to roadways and limited vehicle access, and these can create evacuation challenges for a number of persons, especially senior citizens, and in particular senior citizens living alone, as well as persons with disabilities or access or functional needs. Both buildings and infrastructure networks in Walnut Creek, such as roadways, may be blocked or damaged or destroyed by landslides and wildfires. This could isolate parts of the city. In severe instances, it could isolate the entire city. And there's, of course, potential for service outages. The city's energy system, especially the electricity network, the grid itself, that is highly vulnerable to damage from multiple hazards. I think we've seen the impacts of those from recent events such as the public safety power shutoffs. Damage to that network can, of course, lead to power outages and even potentially may cause wildfires. And there is also significant risk of drought in the area that affects some of the local ecosystems. So we will be asking the Commission to provide any questions or any input on hazards, populations, or assets that in your experience and in your knowledge might be particularly vulnerable to climate-related impacts. So we want to make sure that your understanding of Walnut Creek and that your concerns are reflected in the vulnerability assessment. I would also be happy to take any questions on the vulnerability assessment or any other parts of the presentation. And I should say that this is just a presentation of some of the technical analyses and some of those example sustainability indicators in phase 2 of the plan development, which we'll be moving into shortly. We will then be exploring the specific goals and policies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, enhance community resilience, and support greater sustainability. So thank you very much for your time. Again, be happy to take any questions or feedback that you have.
Any other commissioner comments at this point? Seeing none. Kara, did you want to bring this back and have anything to say to finish your staff presentation?
No, I'll just say thank you again for your input tonight, and we'll work to incorporate it, and we'll see you in the next phase to talk about goals and strategies, as Eli mentioned. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the staff presentation and the commissioner questions and comments at that point. I think it's now time to open up for public comment. And so we will ask the commission secretary, is there any member of the public who wishes to comment on this item at this time?
Thank you, Chair Lezak. I'll take a look at our attendees list for anyone raising their hand, hitting the raise hand feature, or anyone dialing in by phone indicating their interest in a comment by hitting *9 on the receiver. And looking down our list, no one has indicated an interest in providing public comment at this point. I will take a look to see if we have any email on this topic. If you can hold just for a moment as I consult the inbox. 1 second, please. It looks as though we did not receive any emails or other public comments on this item. And so I don't believe there are any comments to share with the commission.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we'll go ahead and close the public comment period on this item. And we will bring this back now to the commissioners for any other kind of comments or feedback that you'd like to give. There's no hearing per se on this item. This is more to provide feedback to staff. So if you have any other thoughts that you didn't feel like you had the opportunity to share during the question and answer period in the presentation, please raise your hand and let me know if you'd like to speak. Wow, okay. If no one else has any comments, I'll just make a couple of quick closing comments or just a little bit of feedback for you. And Kara and Eli, thank you very much for the presentation. and I mean this with the most respect, and that is that I really enjoy that we do a lot of thoughtful, feel-good work here at the city, and we try to think through a great deal of problems that the city will face. But I really don't want to just see us write another feel-good report that will employ a bunch of consultants and just sit on a shelf. I'm hoping that there can be some good action items that come out of this program, and that those action items would allow the city to really focus on trying to find some funds that could be, associated with, achieving those items. I've already mentioned a couple of those that I would really like to see. Electric car chargers in public spaces is a goal that I'd like to see the city raise some funds as part of an action item related to this. I also find that I'm a big bicycler. I would love to ride my bike downtown on those rare occasions that I go downtown, but I find that I don't find appropriate bicycle parking for the type of bicycle I ride. So I think that some thought needs to go into not just expanding bicycle pathways, but bicycle parking, particularly in the public areas. When we talk about vulnerable populations, I know this is not quite what I normally think of when it relates to climate change, but I do know that we have a very great CERT group in the city, and that those folks do train and help prepare folks for the possibility of earthquake and other natural disasters. I'd really like to see the city put together some kind of evacuation drill, because I think the two things we think about when we think about vulnerability are, hot days when, people, particularly homeless people, need a place to go. Are there shelter places that people can go? There's probably cool movie theaters that nobody's using right now. But then there's the idea that, if we have a big fire and that fire cuts off a road or cuts off electricity and or that there's smoke in the air, how are we going to handle those populations? And I think every city, in response to what we saw happen in Paradise, needs to think about what could happen and to do a better job of just communicating with their community. So I look forward to all the other community outreach items that you come up with, and the goals generating some very specific indicators that we can really go do some action. So thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing on this item. Thank you for being here tonight. And we'll go ahead and move on the agenda to our next public hearing item, which is item 4B, the project Mount Diablo mixed use project. It's CUP MUP design review TMP. It's an application number Y18-063 for the addresses of 1532 and 1556 Mount Diablo Boulevard. And we'll go ahead and ask the staff to do their presentation.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. For those of you I haven't met yet, and for those in the general public watching at home, my name is Greg Kapovich, a senior planner with the Community and Economic Development Department here at City Hall. For those of you I already know, it's nice to see you again. It's been a while, I think since before COVID that I've seen all of you, so it's nice to be back. I will be presenting to you a mixed-use project, which is at the corner of Mount Diablo and Locust. It is 3 different buildings to be constructed in 2 phases, with an underground parking garage, about 26,000 square feet of commercial space, and 42 residential condominium units. The proposed land use is a mixed use that complies with the vision of the specific plan, but it does require a conditional use permit to set the residential density and to set the residential parking requirements. It also requires a minor use permit to allow a valet parking program. And finally, it requires a tentative map to create the airspace condo map and an exception to the setback along Mount Diablo. Now, this is a study session, so this is really meant to obtain your feedback prior to returning to this commission. So here is the site as it exists today. It's two parcels. One is the old Z Gallery site fronting Locust Street. The other is the old Walnut Creek Automotive site and fronts both Mount Diablo and Commercial Lane. Together, they total just over 33,000 square feet in size. To the north is the Veggie Grill restaurant. To the east is the rooftop building, which is where the Slice House restaurant is on the ground floor. There's a retail tenant. There's a rooftop bar. There's a Tomatina restaurant and a jewelry store also to the east. Both sites and everything surrounding have a PR general plan designation and zoning category, and they are all considered a part of the downtown core area. So before I get into the actual proposal, the site is within the Locust Street, Mount Diablo specific plan area and is actually identified as Opportunity Site Number 2. Together, the two properties were planned for a mixed-use development to contain about 20,000 square feet of commercial space, 36 residential units, and 124 stalls of underground parking. And here's the proposal. It's 3 buildings with the shortest 2-story building fronting the corner of Mount Diablo and Locust before rising to 4 stories as you move north and east, just as envisioned in that specific plan. Building 1, which is also phase 1, is 4 stories, about 10,000 square feet of ground floor retail space, 30 residential units on floors 2 through 4, and a rooftop open air restaurant and landscape deck area. The second phase, indicated in the purple and red, would be 2 separate buildings with a public paseo separating the two. At the corner is a 2-story, 9,000 square foot commercial building and a 4-story building with 7,000 square feet of ground floor retail and 12 units above condo units would sit behind that 2-story building. There's no rooftop activation proposed for the phase 2 building. So now, the applicant originally planned to appear before you about a year ago with just the phase 1 site. However, just before the hearing, news broke out that the tenant of phase 2 had declared for bankruptcy. So the applicant could not reach a deal to acquire the phase 2 site, but the applicant now represents both ownership groups based on this new phased approach. Obviously, phase 1 would be constructed first, followed by phase 2. They would share garage ingress, egress, and the garage ramps on the phase 1 site. And then finally, additional underground parking stalls would be constructed as a part of phase 2. Other elements of the specific plan would actually be split right down the middle. The idea being that phase 1 development wouldn't prohibit phase 2 from completing the vision of that specific plan. So let's talk density, which is the first CUP under consideration. The PR zone, which is strictly a commercial zone, does allow for residential uses if it's allowed by a specific plan. In this case, we do have that. And it allows the Planning Commission to set that density based on a conditional use permit. So the proposed 42 units across the combined site would result in a 54.75 density. This is in line with the range allowed in the multifamily special high general plan designation, which is really only found in the core area and is intended to expand downtown living. Now, phase 1 would be constructed first, so the initial 30 units built under phase 1 would result in 73 dwelling units, which is still within line of that general plan designation and fits. And then given that the density of both phases do hit the intent of the core area, staff does support the proposed density, but is seeking your feedback tonight. So the specific plan outlines requirements related to height, step backs, and setbacks. This slide is the height regulation map, which is establishes a lower height at the corner and allows for a rise as you head north and east. You can also see here the vision to create the multiple buildings on the site. And again, I'll go back to this slide here that does show that increase in that step back in height, the corner being at 35 feet and the 4-story buildings being at 50. They're all in compliance with that height requirement, except for the rooftop activation on building 1. And speaking of the rooftop activation, typically in Walnut Creek, we have certain elements that can exceed the height requirement so long as they don't rise above 12 feet above the roof plane, and that they don't exceed 25% of the roof area. This is really meant to accommodate elevator shafts, mechanical equipment, things like that. But this specific plan does encourage rooftop activation in the form of gardens and open-air restaurants in addition to that equipment. But all the items together can't exceed 80% of the roof area. So this exhibit that's before you is really meant to show you that 79% of the rooftop contains one of these elements. The red area represents the roof membrane with no public access, while the other areas indicate the outdoor deck, the open-air restaurant, solar panels, mechanical equipment. Therefore, the rooftop does comply with the height requirements and the intent of the specific plan to activate the roof. So now back to the specific plan. In addition to height, the plan requires setbacks sufficient enough to provide a 15-foot wide sidewalk along Mount Diablo, a 12-foot wide sidewalk along Locust, and a 10-foot wide sidewalk to the north to connect Duncan Arcade to Locust. And that's indicated with the green dotted lines on the site. So the sidewalk to the north connecting the Duncan Arcade to Locust Street was constructed when Veggie Grill located just north of this site. So, and that's indicated with the red arrow here. And it does already exist. And I don't mean to overkill this slide here, but it does show the proposed sidewalk widths as well. The applicant proposes the required 12-foot minimum sidewalk along Locust, but they do propose a sidewalk below 15 feet along Mount Diablo. And here is a closer view and an overhead along Mount Diablo. So the average setback here is about 12.5 feet, 12.38 to be exact. But when you consider design elements such as street trees, planters, benches, anything really designed to separate the pedestrian from the traffic flow along Mount Diablo, it results in an unobstructed sidewalk width that varies between 7 and 10 feet. The red circles here represent the pinch points where the 7 feet would lie. Now, the specific plan does allow for the commission with the highest authority on the project, and that would be the Planning Commission in this case, to allow a sidewalk less than 15 feet, and that decision is before you. So a little bit of context, the project to the east, which is planned north in this diagram, contains a very similar setback of 12.5 feet along Mount Diablo, and was approved by DRC at that limit, so long as there wasn't a sidewalk, an unobstructed sidewalk of less than 8 feet. That project proposed similar landscaping, street trees to separate the pedestrian from the traffic. So DRC and staff do support the reduced width of the sidewalk so long as that unobstructed width does not decrease below 8 feet. So if the Planning Commission agreed, we would place a condition of approval on the entitlements, and the applicant will return to DRC to figure out the design elements to see how that unobstructed sidewalk width would be achieved. So back to the specific plan, also on Opportunity Site 2, we had a 20-foot wide paseo that was envisioned and a 1,000 square foot plaza, and that's indicated within that red circle there. It also included a recessed corner at the northeast corner to improve. There's a dog leg along Commercial Lane that has been problematic for service trucks over the years. And the image in the top right is that existing dog leg. You can't quite tell in this photo, but there's actually scuff marks from the trucks hitting the rounded building here. So focusing on phase 1 first, the applicant includes half of the paseo, half of the plaza, and when phase 2 is developed, it can complete those improvements as planned. You can see the building was pulled back to improve that dog leg. This pullback isn't as dramatic as shown on the specific plan, but I'd like to remind you that the specific plan was a schematic. This is actually proposed drawings reviewed by engineers, our traffic engineering division, and the truck access is greatly improved as proposed. And here's phase 2 completing that paseo and that plaza kind of in the middle of the screen there. So circulation, vehicles are indicated with the red arrows. They would enter off of Mount Diablo onto Commercial Lane. They'd make the turn and either decide to enter the parking garage of the site, continue up along Commercial Lane, which is left in this project, in this slide, or continue down towards the city parking garage or to Locust altogether. The green dots are the pedestrian access points on the ground level that lead towards the garage below and the uses above. The green dot towards the bottom is for residents. It leads to a lobby, access to the floors above and the underground parking garage. The green dot up top, which is closest to Mount Diablo, is actually the elevator, providing access from the ground floor directly to the rooftop deck. And the green dot to the left is from the ground floor to the parking garage only. So pedestrians seeking access along Commercial Lane would utilize a walkway that ranges between 4 and 6.5 feet in width and connects both elevators to Mount D. This walkway is recessed under the second story and behind the alley right of way. So here's the garage ramp with the valet queuing area. The parking for phase 1 can provide 36 striped physical stalls, but the applicant proposes to utilize a valet service for both the residential and the commercial uses during phase 1 and phase 1 only. The 24-hour valet service can accommodate another 34 vehicles for a total of 70. The drop-off area is located in blue and is completely ADA accessible. Once people drop off their car, they can follow the ADA path of access to the ground level, to the stairways or elevators on either side. The ones down below in this drawing provide access to the plaza area, as well as all the other levels of the building. That would mostly be used by the residents themselves. And then you can see the drop-off area that's indicated. That's indicated in blue. There's actually 7 spaces there along the 100-foot long garage ramp. It's 25 feet wide, so that leaves about 16 feet for vehicles to exit after considering the cars that are waiting to be serviced. You can see the pickup area that's outside the garage ramp entirely. That's in the darker green. So the valet parking requires a minor use permit, and a consideration to make when reviewing the valet parking is whether or not the program impedes on-site and off-site circulation. The applicant did prepare a trip generation study, which included the ground level retail phase 1, the 30 residential units, and the rooftop restaurants as causes for the trips. Worst case scenario, which is the PM peak hour, 42 inbound vehicles are expected and 21 outbound vehicles are expected. That equates to about 1 inbound every 1.4 minutes and 1 outbound every 2 minutes. So according to the study, the valet service with 3 employees can service 3 cars every 3 minutes, or 60 cars an hour. Based on that service rate, with the queue that can accommodate up to 7 cars, the report concludes that the garage ramp will not exceed capacity and not cause backup onto Commercial Lane. Outbound vehicles queue a little differently, so as not to block the garage ramp. And given the lesser service rate of 28 outbound vehicles, and the fact that the parking service has a lot more control over how and when they service and deliver the cars to the people waiting, the study concludes that also won't negatively affect on or off-site circulation. I will add that the solution to an overflow problem is actually adding additional valet employees to increase the service rate. So the applicant is open to a condition of approval requiring increased levels of staffing if and when a backup is anticipated or is experienced by code enforcement. But again, the study doesn't foresee that happening. So if you show support for the minor use permit and for the valet parking program, then phase 1 can accommodate 70 vehicles. 27 of those are typically required for the commercial requirement, leaving 43 for the residential units. It's up to this commission to determine the residential parking requirement. But what's typically required? I plan to show you what this project would require in other areas of the city just for a little bit of context. So projects located outside of the downtown area, and that would be your typical M1, M1.5, M2, outside the core area, would require 56 parking stalls for the residences. And that's all based on bedroom count. And in this case, the applicant proposes 43. Now, commercial isn't allowed in the multifamily zone, but if we combine the two just to compare apples for apples, the outside core area would require 83 total stalls, where this project proposes 70. The city also has a BART proximate standard that was created to lessen parking demand for residential projects located within a half-mile of BART, considering people are just less likely to drive a car in those more dense areas. This project is not close enough for that consideration, but again, just for context, the residential portion of phase one would require 44 stalls, which is one more over than what is proposed right now. So each of the previous scenarios resulted in a residential deficiency, 13 for the multifamily district and 1 for the BART proximate. But I'd like to remind you that those are two of the oldest parking requirements that the city has in place for residential uses. I will add that the environment and thinking around the topic of parking has changed and continues to change at the state and local levels. In the past 2 years, we've seen the state significantly reduce parking requirements for projects in dense areas and near transit. In fact, mostly market rate projects that had a small percentage of affordable units were reduced to 0.5 stalls per bedroom. In 2020, the parking requirement was completely eliminated for 100% affordable projects. At our own local level, the recently adopted Rethinking Mobility Plan encourages alternatives to actually constructing parking spaces and actually formally recognizes that our residential parking requirements are too high. In fact, the city just received a grant to reevaluate those requirements, and we're getting under preparation to do so. In addition, and in line with the mobility plan, but not quite as much as a reduction as the state, the two north and west downtown specific plans were also recently adopted and actually enacted reduced parking requirements for residential uses, and it was actually below the BART proximate standards. And I've indicated what those were here for you below. So in the north and west downtown specific plan, the parking requirement would be 28 stalls for a total of 55 when combined with the commercial uses. Again, these don't apply to the subject site, but I could say the same for the BART proximate and the regular multifamily zoning districts. These two specific plans were the most recently adopted by council, share similar neighborhood characteristics as the subject site, and reflect both the movement by state and our own Rethinking Mobility Plan. And for those reasons, staff thinks it's the most appropriate comparison to assist you in making a parking determination rather than the less dense areas located outside the core area, which have already been pegged for reevaluation. So staff is seeking feedback on that matter. So with all that said, the applicant has also submitted a parking study, which reviewed 14 Bay Area residential projects for parking demand. Of those 14, I would say 3 are the most similar to the project in that they're market rate, share a similar distance from transit, have similar unit breakdown with bedroom count, they're infill development, located in dense areas. So here's a table that shows what would be required in the 2 core area specific plans in the first row, areas outside the core in the second, and at the bottom is this table that illustrates what's done with the study that they provided. It concludes that the 3 projects average 29% of their parking supply remaining unused. That would equate to 16 unused parking stalls for this project. When combined with the 27 required for commercial, the project would require 67 spaces and would be able to accommodate 70. As an added measure, the applicant also proposes TDM measures in the form of unbundled parking, BART pass subsidy program, real-time transit info, and a transportation coordinator. And according to the study, these TDM measures could further reduce the parking demand by another 20%. However, just using a more conservative 10%, that would reduce it another 4 stalls. So let's move on to phase 2 of the project, which would construct a 2-story parking structure that could accommodate 82 physical strike stalls. The commercial component of phase 2 would require 38 stalls, leaving 44 for the residential use. Now, typically, the residential portion would require 10 stalls in other areas of the downtown core, that being the north and west downtown areas, and 24 stalls outside the downtown area, which phase 2 site provides for in both scenarios. However, when phase 2 is built, parking will be shared between both phases. And the phase 1 portion will take the excess parking stalls from phase 2 and eliminate the need for the valet parking program. So together, the project proposes 121 stalls. That's when phase 2 is complete. If we utilize the other downtown specific plans as a measuring stick, the project would require 103 stalls. If we utilize the parking study, 116 spaces would be required. The project can beat both and eliminate reliance on the valet parking program. So in summary, the project meets the requirements of the specific plan, saves the sidewalk width along Mount Diablo, fulfills the vision of the public paseo, the public plaza, improves the dogleg on Commercial Lane, activates the rooftop with a restaurant and garden, provides 42 new housing units to increase to our housing supply as warranted in the general plan. The proposed density is right in line with the typical projects found within the core area where high density is encouraged. Given the parking assessment, project location, proximity to the downtown area, TDM strategies, and a comparison of neighboring residential areas, staff feels the parking is sufficient as proposed. So we'll be looking for comments specific to the following items when your discussion portion begins. Understanding there's a lot to talk about here, staff does suggest tackling subjects in this order, as each are independent decisions, but they actually do rely on each other. As an example, if you're okay with the valet parking program for phase 1, then you can consider all 70 spaces when considering the residential parking requirement. I did receive some comments from 2 citizens since the staff report was published. One is an email that was distributed to you. This person prefers a 100% residential project, given the economic climate of the retail industry and all the vacancies that are happening right now, even pre-COVID, apparently. A second citizen, which is a nearby business owner, phoned staff and was generally supportive of the project. They were excited about the extra trash storage room that the project proposes to help clean up the trash enclosures along Commercial Lane. But he does want to be included in any future discussions to activate Commercial Lane. And he wants to talk about the idea of the unbundled parking with the applicant. He is concerned with the temporary impacts due to the construction. And that was pretty much the summary of our conversation. In addition, Ethan has some written comments from Commissioner Strongman, who couldn't be here tonight. And that concludes my presentation. I'm here to field any questions that you may have.
Okay, so before we go ahead and have commissioners ask any questions they might have of Mr. Kapovich, Commission Secretary, did you want to read into the record the comments from Commissioner Strongman, or did you want to hold those till later?
I may hold those till later as part of the public hearing process. I want to highlight, though, that the comments provided by Commissioner Strongman, he provided 2 sets of comments, one on the previous item that you've already heard this evening, the Sustainability Action Plan. And the other set of comments he relayed to me, which I then passed along to the public, including yourselves, via an updated set of correspondence that was attached to the public agenda online. I also emailed a link to the commission earlier so that you could receive those comments. If not, I am happy to read the commissioner's comments, Commissioner Strongman's comments during the commission.
I received that as part of the public communication package you sent out. I did review his comments. So unless you feel strongly about it, in the interest of moving forward, I suggest that we go ahead and ask the commissioners if any of you have questions of staff that you want to ask them at this time before we move into the public hearing section. Commissioner Ward?
I was just wondering how many spaces are in that lot right now, and whether there's a net gain or loss of, I guess it would be commercial parking we're most concerned about once the project is developed. Because currently it's a parking lot, essentially, most of the lot.
Well, the existing auto site, which is the phase 1, is currently used as a parking lot, but it's not officially a parking lot. It's just used that way.
Well, certainly looks like a parking lot. People are paying for it. So, I mean, it's functioning as that. So I guess we can keep talking about it, but I'm just there's been a huge sea change since this COVID thing in terms of downtown parking and the availability of street parking. And I don't think all that street parking is coming back. And so I have concerns less about the residential parking, but about the net loss of commercial parking, especially if there's going to be additional businesses put in there. So I just wondered what those numbers were.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I can tell you there's a net increase on the commercial side
Okay.
with this project.
Okay. Thanks. I have comments on the other stuff, but we'll do them in the order that we're going. So that was my only basic question to start with.
Anyone else? Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, I have a number of questions. Now, one thing that you didn't address that is a real concern to me is commercial lane, the requirement of the specific plan that, the goal of the specific plan, the commercial lane be activated, which is intended to be more of a pedestrian use, and the failure of this project to provide a sidewalk for safety beyond the limits of the 20-foot vehicle right-of-way. I would like to know how staff justifies not requiring a pedestrian safety zone along the perimeter of this building, the entire perimeter of this building, when there's only vehicle space provided in the commercial lane. How do you guys find that's okay?
Well, as you alluded to, commercial lane is very narrow. The specific plan does, indicate as much as with needing the improvements to the dog leg. I would say that the setback requirements indicated in the specific plan specifically call out the Locust Street, Mount Diablo, and the area north of the site as needing a setback sufficient enough to provide, a sidewalk. That wasn't the case along commercial lane. There's no setback to accommodate a sidewalk along commercial lane. It does request that staff look into a connection point, but doesn't require it. It does ask staff to investigate a multimodal approach, temporary or full-time, with transitioning commercial lane from, a service truck center, 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. as an example, and then using barricades that you see in San Francisco or the such, blocking it off for pedestrians only. Obviously, that would take a lot further discussions with the surrounding property owners, and I do know the project site property owner has started those discussions. They're just not, fully baked at the point. In the meantime, the project does have forward-facing retail to commercial lane to help activate commercial lane, and does provide a private pathway, a recessed private pathway, to allow pedestrians to safely navigate commercial lane without being within commercial lane.
Okay, is there any street in the city of Walnut Creek that doesn't have a sidewalk, that doesn't have an adequate place for pedestrians? I mean, downtown we have sidewalk requirements, and commercial lane is an anomaly. We're letting somebody develop right to the property line. Again, we have no safety zone for a pedestrian. How can you justify that liability?
In speaking with the engineering division, they treat commercial lane differently. It is a right-of-way, and technically speaking, all right-of-ways are required to have a sidewalk. But the exception is commercial lane, given the fact that it's service-oriented and narrow. Creating the multimodal, pedestrian environment that the specific plan envisions is for the entire width of commercial lane and requires it to be shut down to properly do. But when it's, at the time for the service commercial delivery trucks to utilize it, it's going to be primarily for that use.
Okay, you can see where I'm going. That'll come out in my comments. The next thing is you made a comment in the staff report that is page 18 of your staff report. It says, while safety was a concern, so you're acknowledging that safety was a concern, you said that the applicant provided an extra trash storage room on the ground floor. What does that have to do with, in anticipation of partnership with neighboring businesses? What does that have to do with improving the safety?
It's a future. To be honest, it's just to clean it up. It might have been a misquote. It's mainly for aesthetics. I know that there's a lot of conversations with the property owners that face commercial lane, that if we can find a consolidated trash area, it opens it up for additional room for other things. And that might be private pedestrian pathways, what have you.
Okay, going on another topic. There was some comments by DRC in regards to the artwork. And I'd like you to explain to us the Planning Commission's role in determining that there is an adequate space for future art. Although we don't pick the art, we don't approve the art, it's our responsibility to make sure the project can accommodate the art. So where do you see our role in evaluating the building design with regards to accommodating art? If we approve a project that doesn't have a good space for it, it'll never get built. How do you see our role in that?
Maybe I'll let Ethan chime in as well, but I believe the DRC has comments on location of art, and the Arts Commission has final, I guess, design authority of the art.
So I'm saying, as a planning commission, if we approve a project that doesn't have sufficient space to build the art, then we have hampered the ability of DRC and the Art Commission from, reviewing and approving something that's adequate. So how do we play in that decision process?
If I could just offer quickly some perspective, there have been other projects that have accommodated the art component on the site, and I'll cite specifically the project on Arroyo. The artwork is actually located on the roof above the lobby, right along Arroyo. So that was something that was incorporated and approved as a potential, or as a viable site for the placement of public art. There could also be, art could be in the form of a mural. A mural along a wall could be accommodated potentially and doesn't have to physically occupy space. I would just say that Greg is correct, that the Design Review Commission evaluates the site location for art, and that the Arts Commission finalizes the artist and the artwork itself.
So where do we play a role? I believe we do play a role. I'm not.
The public art requirement is under the purview of the Design Review and Arts Commissions.
Okay. I'll have something to say about that too. The front setback, Greg, you did explain that. There were three things mentioned, and I don't know if it was in your presentation this evening or in a staff report, but basically the applicant provided one design. The specific plan requires something more, and Design Review was saying they would probably live with something less than the requirement, but probably something more than the applicant proposed. Would you kind of cover that for us? That's the Mount Diablo frontage I'm talking about.
That's correct. The DRC recommended something similar to what the applicant's proposing, so long as the unobstructed sidewalk is widened to at least 8 feet continuously or more.
Okay, so their take on it is, if you at least give us an 8-foot clear path all the way through, we can live with adjustments here and there. Is that right? Okay,
correct.
Okay, so now here's a big one. The way I understand the phase 2 issue is that some sort of agreement has to occur between the current property owners. They're two different property owners now. There has to be an agreement. They have to merge their parcels, and in order for phase 2 to go forward. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, are you aware of any such agreement that exists right now?
I don't. The applicant is here where he can explain it.
Okay, maybe the applicant can respond to that when we get there. Okay, but in the absence of that, phase 2 will never develop.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you and I talked about this offline, and DRC commented on it. But do you happen to know the relative height of the building at 1500 Mount Diablo and the height of this building?
Gosh, I believe you're talking about the one on the corner of Main and Mount Diablo.
Yeah, that's 50. I think that's 1500.
I think it's slightly less. Is it? I think it's slightly
Okay.
less than 50 feet.
All right, yeah, I didn't want to put you on the spot. I know DRC asked it, you and I talked about it. You said that'll come out when we get into actual, this is just a study session, so we don't, but that would be something that we probably want to look at. Okay, let's see. So you gave us a lot of parking statistics. Thank you for that. Okay, one thing that we didn't talk about, or you didn't talk about, is the parking demand generated by a restaurant on a roof. Now, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that because this is an outdoor, theoretically an outdoor dining rooftop restaurant, and maybe it's in the specific plan, but there is no parking requirement to accommodate the restaurant. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's for the open air components of the restaurant. They're not included in the parking calculation. I would say that there are some areas of the rooftop restaurant that are included, about 1,000 square feet that are enclosed spaces that are ancillary to the open air restaurant, such as bathrooms or, you know, conditioned space in the kitchen, for example. And I would say that the trip generation report did include the open air restaurant in its figures for the amount of cars that would happen at the PM peak hour.
Okay. Have you ever evaluated if that were required to have parking per the standards of a normal restaurant, what the parking requirement would be for that space?
Yeah, if we included the whole open air restaurant, it would be another 12 spaces.
Okay. Now you mentioned that you know, the applicant I think would be willing to have a condition of approval. Maybe the applicant will want to address this also, but a condition of approval that if the valet parking with 3 attendants was failing to meet the demand, they would add another one. They'd have a condition of approval that we could require that. What is the enforcement capability of the city of Walnut Creek? Once this thing has been developed and sold, it's condominium, so the developer's no longer involved. What enforcement authority does the city of Walnut Creek have on those 40 or whatever, however many units we have, 42 condos, and the commercial owners? How do you enforce that? Developer's gone. You've got 42 people up there. They don't really care.
Well, I mean, maybe the applicant could talk about the contracts that would be involved, but, you know, we would have, you know, a minor use permit in place, a use permit in place that would require the valet until phase 2 was completed. So the city code enforcement staff would not simply allow, you know, ownership, you know, whether it be an HOA to say we don't want to do this anymore. Likewise, if code enforcement gets a complaint that, hey, there's backup on the commercial lane, you know, code enforcement's got a condition of approval they can point to and say, you need more staff.
And what I mean, I'm looking at a practical standpoint. Your code enforcement has to go up to a homeowners association board, a management company, and 42 owners, plus the commercial owners. And they want to go up and say, you guys can't live here anymore. Or you guys have to hire another valet, and that, well, we don't have it in our budget. How do you deal with that? What is your concept from the city standpoint dealing with that proposal or that suggestion by the applicant that that's a solution?
I mean, code enforcement usually, you know, at least in the city of Walnut Creek, is a voluntary compliance. We try to get them to do what we ask before we have to cite. But, you know, if there's repeated violations with no efforts made to resolve the issue, fines start being issued.
To who? 42 owners individually?
Yeah, it would be, you know, the various ownership groups, whether that be individual people or an HOA, or, you know, if the commercial units were sold off as condo units, each one of them. But yes.
Okay. All right, I see that as problematic. We'll let the applicant address that further. Who pays for the transportation coordinator?
I can let the applicant talk to that.
All right. And phase 2, there's no, well, we're just reviewing this, we're giving you feedback, but there's no way to compel the owner of the adjoining property to ever develop. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, if it's economically unfeasible, or he just likes owning that little store there, or whatever the circumstances are, there's no way to compel phase 2 to ever happen, correct?
Right. He would need to be motivated. Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's all my questions, Greg. Thank you.
Any other commissioners have questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Anderson.
As far as the Monte Diablo setback, it says that the Planning Commission has the opportunity to vary that if desirable. The only justification I saw for reducing it was the fact that the adjoining parcel has a reduced setback. It's my feeling that even if the adjoining parcel has a reduced setback, you know, that doesn't sort of imply that it's fine for each parcel along the street. There's a reason that the setback is larger than it is on that adjoining parcel. Also, some variation is also nice to have there. So I'm curious as to what we would see as desirable about reducing the setback.
To answer your first question, you know, the authority lies entirely with this commission on how that sidewalk looks if you grant an exception. The DRC recommended something a little bit wider than proposed right now, as long as there's an 8-foot unobstructed, you know, sidewalk width for people to traverse. This commission could decide it needs to be 10. This commission could decide that they don't want to do any of the exception and it's got to be a 15-foot wide sidewalk. It's completely up to you. With regards to the rationale, you know, we didn't want to create a funneling point along Mount Diablo. We do recognize that the rooftop restaurant did a nice job with the landscaping there, separating the vehicles from the pedestrians. It's a nice atmosphere. So, you know, it's something that staff considered.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners for staff now? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and open the public hearing and begin by asking the applicant if he would like a presentation.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Baldacci, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just make sure this. Can you enable screen sharing for me?
We are on it. We will enable in a moment.
Thank you. So I'm David Balducci. I'm with Align Real Estate. We are the applicant here. And also from our team, we have Alan Moore, who's our land use attorney, and Guyon Childress, who's our architect with Woods Baggett. And Guyon will be doing a little bit of the presentation as well. And they are here to answer questions also. Okay, great.
Screen sharing has been enabled.
Okay. I think it's sharing the. Trying to make that full screen. Is that big enough for everybody to see? Ethan?
That's okay for me.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wasn't sure if it's not sharing the way I thought it would work. So to introduce the project, I'd like to just say that this was an opportunity that came to us that we were very familiar with the specific plan, we're the developer of 1389 North California, also an opportunity site in this specific plan. And so the opportunity to develop this site came across. So we studied the specific plan. We understood the desire to assemble it with the piece next door. And we sort of took a look at it and we kind of asked ourselves, well, is it possible to develop this site in a way that doesn't foreclose the development of the adjacent site? And if so, is that something that the city would support? So that's how we submitted the PRT. We got some positive feedback, so we continued to pursue it. A second goal of the project was really to design a building that was international quality architecture, sort of worthy of this downtown location and its neighbors. And that's why we hired Woods Baggett, and we hope that people are welcoming of this design. And then the third thing we really wanted to be able to accomplish was deliver on all the components that the specific plan wanted to achieve, notably the 2-level underground parking lot, the paseo, the widening of the curve, and the activation of commercial lane. So those were our goals. And with that, we designed the project that's before you now. And you'll note that this project is unique in its facade, which are these wood-like slats. It's actually a reused product that Guy will tell you more, but it's a renewable product. And so we have the 3 levels of residential. The ground floor is primarily retail. We have the lobby for the rooftop, the activated rooftop, slightly down commercial lane where the pedestrians can get up to the roof. And then the pedestrian lobby is on the other side. Switch slides. So this is, hopefully you can see this. This is a screenshot of the site as it is today, the parking lot for Google Earth. This has been owned in the same family for a century, which is why it's a unique opportunity to be redeveloped. There's a unused former auto repair, I think, service in the back, the surface lot. And then on the right, you can see commercial lane, which other than 1500 and the jewelry store a few buildings down, is really back of house. And you can even see a dumpster here. These buildings all have their trash and everything on the back of commercial lane. And we'll come to that in our proposal, what we're including here, that hopefully can help rectify that problem and enable the activation of commercial lane down the road. So this is where our residents would enter. This is the portion of the paseo that is on the phase 1 property. The residents would come down and enter in the lobby at the back. And above, you can see the wood slats, which can be opened or closed, and also creating this sort of dynamic facade. One of the things I wanted to touch on that wasn't really discussed in Greg's report or presentation was the quality of the units we envision here. So one of the things we've done is every unit in the project has an exterior balcony, 6 foot wide, spans the length or more of the general living area. So we put the living room on the interior, where normally that would sort of be on the exterior. So you can see that would be over here, where you would have your sofa and maybe your entertainment center. And we put the kitchens along the outside because we really wanted to embrace this idea, the good weather in Walnut Creek and this indoor outdoor sort of living experience, which you really don't get in a higher density multifamily project like this. So our kitchens are on the perimeter, and we actually have a stacking glass, like a nano wall glass system proposed here that slides open. And the kitchen, if you look closely, you can see extends through that glass wall. So you can really open your unit up. And then on the exterior facade, you could have those wood slats either be closed or open, depending on your preference. So we really wanted to give these occupants an opportunity to really embrace this sort of indoor-outdoor lifestyle that we know is very desirable in Walnut Creek. So here we are this is a plan of the ground. You can see commercial lane above, Mount Diablo to the right. This is the lobby for the activated rooftop here. Then you've got this pedestrian zone here, and then an exit vestibule for the commercial parking below, who would come up here. We've got equipment room here that has to be at grade for PG&E. And then these 2 rooms are extra trash storage. So the hope would be that we could move these dumpsters somehow, working with the neighbors, down here, and maybe there's seating temporarily during the day, and that we've really done a good activation of commercial lane. Here is the widening, and this might go to some of the other comments, right? You have a situation here where the trucks can't make the turn. So I'm not sure whether pedestrians should be encouraged to walk down here too. It's too narrow with that radius of a turn. And then we have the ramp down, which goes straight down. And then coming around, you can see the Paseo here and our residential lobby. So this is the roof, and I think the roof of this building is pretty special. Again, we've designed it so that the pedestrians come straight up from just in commercial lane, and the elevator opens, and immediately you're hit with what is a pretty phenomenal view. You are overlooking the 1500 Mount Diablo building and the Neiman Marcus, and straight up at Mount Diablo. So to the right here, this is an open air seating area open to the public during business hours, where shoppers in Walnut Creek can just come and relax, maybe order a drink and some food or not, and just enjoy the views. And this is actually in response to a city council comment from our other project, where it was conveyed to us that there weren't enough places where the pedestrians could get up and enjoy the views in the downtown core. So here we're really providing that. Then you've got an indoor-outdoor restaurant, the kitchen, a lounge bar in the back, and enclosed at this big architectural corner feature would be private dining for a private dining event that someone might want to host there. So this is a drone shot from the height of that outdoor area on the corner, just as you come off the elevator. You can see what we think is a pretty good view of the mountain and in Walnut Creek. So this is something that Greg showed you, and we're just juxtaposing the proposed project here with what was envisioned in the specific plan. You can see the lower building on the corner. It's wrapped by a Paseo. That's sort of hard to see. Corresponds to this, and our building would be the back building over here. And then the garage. Lots to say about the garage. So one of the things the specific plan wanted, and this is a diagram from the specific plan, is it really wanted a 2-level below grade parking structure at this site. And so if both phases of this project are delivered, what you have is 121 below grade spots for both projects. The specific plan had 124. I think when you plan a garage, you always lose a few spots. So this section here, sort of the piano shape, is what we'll be building with phase 1. This is planned to be valet, as Greg said. This could be valet forever. We build projects that have been operating for in excess of a decade that are fully dependent on valet operations, both for apartments and condos. They use stackers, they use car elevators, they have an HOA that is required to provide a level of service to the residents, which is by nature self-policing. No one's going to be happy if they're 12 cars deep in a queue and have to wait 30 minutes to drop off their car. So it's not something the HOA can just do away with. They're restricted by their mortgage agreements. They're restricted by the HOA agreements. So we would provide a level of service here that would certainly not overflow the 7-car queue. I will note we operate garages that are multiples of this with 2 and 3 valets and never experience a queue larger than 7 cars. I think that the modeling in the trip generation is probably something you'll never see in real life. 70 cars coming in and out of this garage at the same time would be astounding. It's not something we see even in garages that are many, many more times the capacity than this. So we're fully prepared to operate this as a valet, either for the condos or if they're rented as an apartment, and we're working with the neighbor. And if the neighbor was to redevelop, they have to access here. We would allow that, and you wouldn't have to merge the lots. I don't think entirely. You would have to create a commercial unit down here that would allow the cars to traverse this. But it would be a prerequisite that the neighbor, if they want to develop this, they would have to conform to the specific plan, as do we, and that would be the way the garage would convert if they developed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Guyon. I don't know if we need to do something to transfer control to Guyon Childress.
We're going to make Guyon a co-host momentarily.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we just made him a co-host. Please go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. I wanted to start by thanking the commission for hearing us tonight and letting us share this exciting project with you. My name is Guyon Childress. I'm the project lead for Woods Bagot Architects. We thought it was critical to share with you kind of our project approach and what we as architects begin with the end user in mind in a human-centric approach to design. You know, our design is informed by the site, but it's also, more importantly, an analysis of what brings the community of Walnut Creek together. We believe what makes Walnut Creek special is the bringing together of typically opposing lifestyle traits of urban and wild and spacious and cultivated. And what I mean by urban is a cosmopolitan vibrance and refined taste of outdoor dining and gallery spaces, cultivated as a awakened community exhibiting cultural groundedness, but also spaciousness. It's where a sense of expansiveness and unhurried attitudes can be accessed. And of course, wild. I mean, this is Walnut Creek, the access to landscape being so abundant. It's embracing these natural amenities with freedom, autonomy, and spirit. So what we're creating, or we believe we're creating, is a premier residential experience that activates the community and blurs the line between public and private. And how we do that is we lean on European references in Spain and Italy, where pedestrian laneways are activated by residential balconies above. We filter light through a dynamic facade system that invites and enchants. And critically, now more than ever, we focus on residential units that enable indoor-outdoor living that Dave was talking about. It's kind of that reinforcing this California outdoor lifestyle that the climate of Walnut Creek allows and encourages. And then we select a material palette that's informed by that project vision and lifestyle principles. It's timeless, it's refined, it's restorative, it's elegant, and it's connected. In practicality, what that means is
You're out of time now, so if you wouldn't mind wrapping it up, please.
Sure, absolutely. So it's Dave was mentioning exterior materials is Resista, which is a wood-like struck material that's made of recycled rice husks, which is a naturally occurring agricultural byproduct. It's it's putting solar heat water collectors on the roof, the maximum amount of rooftop greenery allowed by planning. And then kind of if you look at some other examples of what this dynamic facade will do in a built environment is here. And then, in the end of the day, it's about, a building that's going to evolve from day to night and breathe life into this site that we think is underutilized and centrally located at the heart of Walnut Creek. And we're really excited about this project going forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. And now we'll go ahead and open the public hearing portion to the general public and ask our commission secretary, is there anyone from the general public that would like to make a comment?
Looking to our list of attendees, no one has yet raised a blue hand, and there is no one on a phone. And so I would say there's no one looking to offer comment on this project at this time.
Okay, so Mr. Balducci, if you, I know you probably don't have anything to rebut, but if you felt like your presentation got cut a little bit short and you'd like a couple of minutes to just kind of close your presentation, you have up to 5 minutes.
Well, Chair Lezak, thank you for the opportunity. I guess one thing I did forget to mention along the the sidewalk width in front of the building, that was, it's funny the way these things evolve. We were instructed that it would be most desirable to keep it consistent with 1500. And then Marta Fry, landscape architect, who's an award-winning landscape architect, designed those planners, and we have the pinch points. We can certainly move them to 8 or more, but we were informed it would be most desirable to keep the building frontages and the sidewalk consistent there.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
When are we going to have a chance to talk or to
yes.
ask questions of the applicant?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
As I was just trying to say, I'm sure we'll have a few questions from commissioners for you before we let you go. So with that, I will turn to Commissioner Pickett, and see if anyone actually would like to ask any questions of the applicant.
I have questions, but I can wait.
Okay. Would anyone else like to start before we yield the floor to Commissioner Pickett? Commissioner Ward, please.
Okay. Hi. Well, thank you for this presentation. I was very excited to see what's going to be happening on this very visible and lot right in the middle of our downtown. That's been a parking lot, even though Greg tried to claim it wasn't a parking lot, but it's a parking lot right now. Huge fan of rooftop dining, want to see more housing in downtown. Looks like a really great mixed use vision that we got going here. But I'm really concerned about this two-phase, two-owner plan that you've got going. And it seems like if the second phase doesn't get developed, we lose a lot of the public space, the kind of the gathering area in the middle, and a paseo and all these different things. Like it just potentially could not happen, which would be really detrimental to the whole vision. I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and if there's some way to to get that deal done so that you'd have the entire space all at once and we would have that assurance that the entire project would be done, or if there is a way to mitigate our concern with regard to losing the consistency of those public spaces or the kind of outdoor landscape spaces and paths of travel that are envisioned with it when the entire area is developed. So that's my first concern. So maybe you can speak to that right now.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have been working with the neighbor, but we what they do is ultimately up to them. I guess I would say that we're delivering every part of the public benefit of the increased paseos and the interior courtyard that was designed on this half of the property. I would think that the other side has to go back to the design review commission, and I wouldn't imagine why they wouldn't be held to the requirement of delivering the components that are required on their property.
Okay, so that's a concern, but so I'm not totally fussed about the sidewalk area, but I do think that it perhaps wasn't that maybe this commission's a little more concerned about that amount of space than design review or the staff were. And I think that keeping exact consistency between the corner building that has a very narrow sidewalk and your building is not the number one concern, at least of mine, and maybe a little more space I think would be helpful. It would also enable more landscaping and street trees and all these different things that we like to see. So I hope that you'll keep that in mind and perhaps increase that sidewalk space. That would, I think, be a tremendous benefit along that area, particularly since there's no street parking on Mount Diablo there. It does create a nice pedestrian walking area, and so if it's too narrow, the cars go pretty fast there sometimes because there's a couple of lanes, and if the sidewalk's narrow, it can feel a little crowded. So it would be nice to make sure that everybody feels safe and it's a little more leisurely. So that would be a comment I had about that. I'm a huge parking person. I came to this commission from transportation, so I'm all about parking all the time. I am concerned about the amount of commercial parking that's available because I think that we're seeing a kind of revolution in the way we're using parking in our downtown area right now. This COVID experiment with outdoor dining has resulted in the loss of most of our, or a significant percentage of our downtown street parking spaces, which I'm completely in favor of. I was hoping to have more outdoor dining, and I'm hoping that some of that becomes permanent. But it does change our outlook a little bit in terms of new developments and what kind of parking is going to be required to replace some of the parking that we've lost. So that's something that I think is a little more fluid than maybe it was before. But I do like the idea of unlinking the condo units from the parking that's provided to them and having those be provided separately. I think that's a really beneficial idea. It makes the cost of the residential units potentially lower and more affordable for people, and they can choose whether or not they want to incur the additional expense of having a parking space included with that. And so I think that's a really positive benefit, and I would encourage you to continue to look into that in terms of how that's structured. I'm actually, my day job is an HOA attorney, so I'm not at all concerned about the HOA being able to enforce or require valet parking or to construct and maintain whatever parking program is required as a condition of approval. I have zero concerns about that. I'm confident that we can draft CC&Rs and conditions of approval that would require the maintenance of whatever parking scheme is required to make that work. So maybe that helps Commissioner Pickett not be so worried about that, because I'm feeling good about that. So I know we can make that work. And I do think that I was encouraged to hear that you were considering things like lifts and perhaps valet parking or other kinds of ways to get more cars in the space that you have available, because I think those kind of amenities have been used for a long time in other areas, and they're very effective that way. Let me see. We want to make sure that this building's as green as possible. I know I love the idea of these recycled materials that you're using and alternatives and the indoor-outdoor spaces. But we want to make sure we have enough electric vehicle charging stations, and that the kind of green certified building can be maximized as much as possible. We do love our outdoor spaces here, but it also gets really, really hot, like it is right now in the summer here. And that's always a concern for all of us. So to the extent that the building can be as green as possible and use all of the available recycling and alternative energy sources to make sure that the heating and cooling systems are efficient, and that is definitely a benefit. So, we can't get enough solar panels or whatever's coming up next. We love all that stuff. So we definitely want to see that. And I hope that would be an important component of what you're considering in terms of how it's constructed. And
Commissioner Ward, I know you're on a roll.
All right, you want me to stop?
Hearing portion, and you're going to get a great opportunity to provide more feedback on this item.
I'm always confused about which is which is
No, you're all good. So if you have any specific comments for the applicant at this time, that would be great. And
right.
I hate to stop you while you're on.
No, it's good. No, I don't have any more specific questions, and I'll revert back to my notes if they're not covered when we get to the other section. I apologize for inserting myself in the wrong section. So, thank you.
Any other commissioners other than Mr. Pickett have questions? Okay, Commissioner Pickett, please go ahead.
Okay, so I have formatted my notes here in terms of questions for the applicants, and then I have comments that I'll do separately. Is that
noted? I'll do that next time.
Okay, so
thank you.
This relates to the phase 1, phase 2. This is for the applicant. I have concerns about the ultimate development of phase 2. I'm suspecting there's going to be some serious economic challenges to anybody to be able to afford develop that portion, and part of that is based on the parking concept. And let me just give you some statistics off of your numbers. Let's see, phase 2 is going to bear the burden of 68% of the parking that you're proposing. And it only has 41% of the total land area of the project site, site opportunity site number 2. So it's bearing a significantly higher burden of parking than the phase 1, which you're developing. It's dumping it all over onto the other guy. I think that's going to make it real challenging. If you can't afford to put that parking in, then he certainly isn't going to be able to afford to put it in. Let's see, the commercial space is only the commercial space is only 46%, and they only have 29% of the residences. So they have a significantly less development potential, both residential and commercial, yet they're bearing almost 2/3 of the parking. You can verify these numbers, but can you explain to me how you envision, anybody could conceivably develop phase 2 and why you wouldn't share your burden based on the ratios of the development potential?
Sure, we're building the ramp. We have to build the ramp. And so we have less parking because we have 100% of the ramps. So it's actually cheaper to build 2 levels below grade without ramps than it is to build 2 levels as we are with the ramps. So sure, the ratios might seem off, but at the end of the day, it's the gross cost of building the below grade portion. So they're probably actually a little better off building 2 just boxes down there than we are building 2 connected boxes with ramps.
Okay, we can do our research on that and verify that fact, or you can bring it back to us. Now, I know you can't guarantee the development of phase 2, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, we would be approving the project on a hope that somebody developed it someday. That's what you're asking us to do, correct?
Incorrect.
Okay, what are you asking us to do?
I mean, where we started was approve this project as its own project. And then if phase 2 is to redevelop, we've left every aspect of their requirements for getting cars down and getting connected available to them. So I would think that, if we approve this project the way it is, we should all be excited to have the building we're proposing, and we can be hopeful that the Z Gallery building redevelops or not. And at the end of the day, we have an infill development on transit in the middle of Walnut Creek with a great building that is totally self-sufficient.
Okay, and currently you have no agreement with the adjoining property owner, not to purchase it, but any kind of agreement with regards to sharing parking. In other words, if they develop, do they have an easement to go through your garage to get to their property? Do you have an easement established for that? Do they have it's not an encroachment permit, but the right to bust through your wall? And can your tenants park on their property? Do you have anything like that established with them?
No, we just have their permission to process the application this way.
Okay. And you understand that they can't develop unless it's one site, and your site would then have to somehow merge with their site before they could develop, correct?
Well, I mean, either they could, the way the specific plan works, they couldn't develop their property without ours. I mean, fortunately, since we're on commercial lane, we can phase 1 and then phase 2.
It's for where the curb cuts are allowed, right? For the site
access. What
access.
I'm asking, no. I mean, that was my question. The city has advised us in their staff report that phase 2 cannot develop unless your parcel and their parcel are merged into one deal, because they can't have a break through the property line in the parking structure. That's what the staff report said. And I'm asking you if you're aware of that and how you would propose to give us a comfort level that that'll be dealt with.
You would create I think you would create sort of a commercial condo below, like an airspace parcel to have one piece where the cars would need to traverse, and then you'd have an REA agreement to allow for the parking.
Okay, I think that may require higher level than me and legalese, but I don't really want to solve the problem now. I'm asking the question because I want to know if you have answers to them. and that'll lead into my comments later. How about employee parking? What's your concept on employee parking for the commercial? You've got a restaurant, which will have a lot of employees, and you're going to have obviously the ground floor retail, which will have employees. How do you plan to accommodate employee parking?
We're providing the as much commercial parking as we can in the valet program. We don't have any specific plan to have them park. I suppose they could. I would point out that one good thing about running a garage like this valet is that you can sort of dynamically meet demand, because all your residents aren't going to be there all the time. And so you can sort of, the valets get smart and they learn how many cars they can accommodate at various times of the day.
Okay, so Friday nights will be problematic, but we'll talk about that later. And the valet parking would be paid for by the condo owners, the homeowners association, I assume?
Well, the retail parkers would pay the prevailing rate for however long they're there, just like any valet, and the residents would, have a pass that would just allow them to park however many cars they had the right to park based on their whatever they did bought unbundled.
Okay, so the commercial, now are you still planning to do a commercial condo? Originally you were.
A commercial yeah, there's a map with this project.
Okay, so the commercial spaces will be condominiumized, and there may be multiple owners for the commercial space also, correct?
Correct.
So will the commercial owners, say there's 2 or 3, and the restaurant guy, will all those pay towards the cost of running a valet service, or does valet service do it for free? Because they're getting paid by the commercial customers.
So there would likely need to be a subsidy for running the valet garage, the budget for which would be offset by the revenues that were collected from commercial parkers and built into the HOA or the operating budget of the residential portion of the building.
Okay, can anybody park in there? And if I wanted to go, okay, so here's an example of my experience. The Locust Street garage that's right next door oftentimes is full on Friday evenings. And if I want to go to San Francisco Creamy because I get great ice cream, and the commercial parking lot at Locust Street, the city lot, is full, can I pull down your driveway and park my car there and go to San Francisco Creamery?
Absolutely, as long as it's not full.
Okay. Excuse me a minute, I got a lot of notes here. Okay, this, I know you guys started this thing a couple of years ago, so you're probably anxious to get on with it. But through the evolution of plans, there were plans that showed more landscaping on the rooftop than is currently shown on the rooftop plan. You've reduced the amount of landscaping up there. Can you give me any background as to the reduction in what I consider a benefit to our city is having the landscaping up there?
Yeah, you would note on the rooftop plan that you see roughly 20% of it is roof membrane. That was all landscape before, but this, I think, is a technical requirement of, even if it's not accessed, I don't think we can landscape it. If we can landscape it, even though it's not accessed, we would love to. We embrace green rooftops in all of our projects. The building next door has a great green rooftop. I don't know why you can't have a green rooftop on the 20% that's not accessible, but that was
okay. So that had to get eliminated because you had to get your usable footage down to a certain percentage, and so you had to make that roof.
Maybe Greg could respond. It was always the same usable. It was always 80% were where people could go, and we had as much green on the other 20 as we could, and that had to be removed.
Okay.
Yeah, I could chime in here. Essentially, the activated rooftop that's like the publicly accessible, the outdoor deck, the restaurant, none of that square footage changed. But there is a technical requirement that the activated rooftop, the area that's meant for the pleasure of the people up there, is limited to an 80% max. And it was very clear that the 20% needed to be roof. And that was a technicality, and they made the adjustments as necessary.
Thanks. That's helpful. I know that that's something that probably well over a year ago, you and I may have talked about, Greg, and I can see the history on that. So I just wanted an explanation. Now, also, the renderings show landscaping and trees along Commercial Lane. All the pretty pictures you show us, but the landscape plans don't show anything along Commercial Lane. Can you explain that difference to us?
Guy, do you know?
Yeah, I think that might have been the intention when the renderings were commissioned, and then there were planning comments for the addition of an arcade at the ground level for pedestrian access on our property line, and I believe those trees were eliminated.
And I'm sorry, why were they eliminated?
I believe it was the addition of the arcade at the ground floor within our property line that we added. It was a design update to add in a pedestrian arcade to access the retail and the entry to the restaurant at the ground floor in Commercial Lane within our property itself. So the trees were removed from that location, I believe.
Okay. I'll just point out that those trees make the project look a lot prettier than it might end up looking because the trees aren't there. So, okay. And who maintains the planters along Mount Diablo that are in the public right of way on the sidewalk? Who maintains those?
I mean, it's got to be us. I'm sure the owner of 1500 next door maintains theirs.
So you have commercial and residential owners there. Are the residential owners going to be responsible for some of the cost of maintaining those planters?
Yeah, it'll be baked into the overall. There's one sort of budget with various, members, and the commercial members might have a different allocation of that or may not. But the maintenance of those would be baked into the budget.
Okay, so everybody who's uses that building, both residential and commercial, pay for that commercial frontage maintenance. Okay. Here's one that I struggled with. I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. Maybe it's an easy answer. Where do residents park a moving van when they want to move in?
Guy, do you want to talk about the moving in?
Yeah, I believe we made plans for that within the structure itself at the base of the ramp.
Can you get a van in there? And I know apartments aren't going to have a big 40-foot Beacons van trying to get in there, but even a 30-foot U-Haul or something, I don't know how tall those are, 10 feet.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact clearance for the van size, but obviously it's enough for ADA van height clearance, which would be the majority of moving truck. But I can check.
I'm pretty sure we'll have to get back to you with a specific answer. We always plan to make sure you can have the typical U-Haul that someone moving into a residence this size can fit. And apologies, it's been many months, and so we can.
I might have known the answer one time too, but I don't know it today. So
the engineering division did require a turning radius and a location for a U-Haul type van. I believe it was one of the smaller ones. I forget the the ranges that U-Hauls have in length, but it was one of the shorter ones. But the height.
There's a vertical issue too with going down a ramp and clearing underneath something, because if you got a 10-foot van, it actually maxes out at about 11 feet when you hit that transition curve.
Right.
So it just needs to be dealt with. I'd like an answer. Don't have to have it tonight.
We're over 11 on that first level.
Okay, that probably clears. Thank you. Now, have you had discussions, you mentioned the extra garbage container or garbage storage space, that you were implying that neighbors would be able to put their garbage cans in there, thus freeing up the back of their Tomatinas and whatever else restaurants are in there. Have you had discussions, or do you have any agreements with them to do that?
No agreements. We've had discussions. You obviously heard the comment from the jewelry store, who has a very nice back of house on his building. We've had some discussions with the owners of those buildings. Those are leased to those restaurants, so you need to coordinate the use of that space and how those guys are operating. I assume they would. You would hope they would be excited of the benefit of the increased outdoor seating capacity to the extent we could get something done on Commercial Lane. But they would need to then coordinate with us and the city. That's the city street, so we need to work with the city on that. But we're happy to do that.
Okay, now the open space, you alluded to the fact that on the rooftop, part of the rooftop would be kind of public access. You can go up there, you didn't say this, but bring your latte from Starbucks across the street, go up on the roof and read your book and enjoy Mount Diablo. Is that what your intent is? Is that's going to be open to the public? Anybody can go up there. They don't have to buy a drink. They don't have to order lunch. They can go up there with their own box lunch and sit up there for 2 hours and then go back to work or whatever. Is that the intent?
That has always been our intent, subject to, the doors on the lobby will lock after hours downstairs, but yeah.
Okay, so that would be something then that you would expect to include in your lease with the restaurant operator, that he couldn't prohibit people from using that space. Is that what you're thinking? Or
Yeah, the plans have always shown it just as a general seating, whether or not, it's obviously way more than you would need for people just waiting for tables. And it was designed to give people a place to go and enjoy the views and hang out and maybe get service or maybe not.
okay, so your commitment to us then would be that it would be an open public place that would not have limitations imposed by the restaurant operator or the building owners.
The limitations would be obviously standard stuff like excessive loitering maybe, but they would be just the building hours. It's not going to be a capital P public space where people can go 24/7.
Right.
But obviously, security and other things.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So that would be something that would be reasonable to expect. Now, just the last issue, and I asked Greg this question, and maybe you know the answer about the relative height of your building versus 1,500. And with the drone aerial photo you showed us, it looked like your building was considerably taller than 1,500. Do you know if there's any accuracy in that, or do you know, or maybe the architect knows the relative heights between those two buildings?
Dave, I believe the last occupiable floor on 1,500 is 35 feet, and then that restaurant pops up, so they're mechanical, and it pops up past the 12 feet, which is the max, and I think it pops up maybe 14 feet above that.
Okay, so that'd be 50 feet. So what is your building?
Well, we're 50 feet to the roof deck, and then we pop up another 12.
Okay, so you eventually, the highest thing on your building will be 12 feet taller than their building.
Correct.
Okay. Sorry to take so long, but that does answer all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pickett. I saw Commissioner Reiser had his hand up at one point. Are you still interested in asking a few questions, Commissioner Reiser?
Good for now. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson.
Just one question. It's the same I asked staff. If the Planning Commission can grant a reduction of the setback, the front setback on Mount Diablo, if it's desirable, what rationale would you have that reducing the setback would be desirable?
For me, Dave, for me as an architect, it's the consistency of the sidewalk experience as you're walking through, and you've got the same edge going across, and then you've got the same kind of level and quality of planters that's separating you to the street.
I guess I would add, the consistency is valuable. I spend a lot of time in this area, and I walk there a lot, and I do think whoever made the comment about the separation from the traffic by the planters as 1500 has, that's important no matter what the width is. I think that's a really good thing. I've never experienced any sort of cramping or pinch points or felt that the sidewalk wasn't wide enough at 1500. So I would just add that. And you want your retail tenants at least want to be highly visible, and they want to seem active. And so having them near the street is certainly a benefit to the retail tenants. And we have, given the visibility of this site, despite the current climate, we do have active inquiries from tenants coming in both for the roof and for the ground floor space. And if I might, I hope this doesn't go out of bounds over answering your question, but at 1380, we have our retail parking on site, and we are in the final strokes of a lease that I think was going to bring a very desirable tenant into downtown Walnut Creek. And a huge part of it is the fact that we do have that parking. So as much as park and walk from the city lots has been a huge part of the success of downtown Walnut Creek, and I grew up in Walnut Creek, and I've watched it change since before Nordstrom's went in. And that was a crucial, important thing the city did to make it the regional retail destination that it is. But there are tenants who do want to have their customers park on site. So the specialty fitness guys who are still, hopefully they'll be back in business. They definitely like having, tenants come and park. So that's a benefit that we have here because we're building the retail parking on site.
Okay, any other commissioners, questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and close the public hearing. And at this point, since there's no action items to be taken, what we'll do is we are looking to provide staff some feedback on these items. And I know, Mr. Kapovich, you had a specific list. Maybe you want to post that back up so everybody can remember what's on that list. But I'm sure you're going to get lots of comments on the whole project. And so I will ask if any one of the commissioners want to go ahead and start. Who wants to be first?
So I'll go because I kind of already commented when I wasn't supposed to comment. So I'll just wrap up my comments. So I think that I'm one of the people that would be in favor of the valet parking at least considered to be made permanent. And I think that it needs to be in conjunction with like a wide variety of different parking options, because I think it's important to maximize the parking that's available for everybody for the reasons that I already stated. The residential parking requirement, I think it's adequate, but I do like the idea of unlinking it from the ownership of the condominium units, because I think that provides a number of benefits for everybody. I think I didn't have anything particular on the residential density issue, and I think we've discussed the 8-foot sidewalk along Mount Diablo. I'm not as much of a purist for complete consistency from between the buildings, and I think a little more space could be useful. But that could, there's some wiggle room there. So, and I agree the planners have to be there. So I don't think that was ever a question. So that's kind of a summary of my previous comments. More in the structure of the comments that we have there. But this looks like a really promising and very beautiful building. So thank you for bringing it to us to get started on it. It looks like it's got a lot of potential for a really premier location in our city. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ward. Who's next?
Why not?
All right, Commissioner Reiser.
I'll start at the bottom and go up. And on it said also on our staff report, looking for overall site layout and circulation. As was mentioned a few times here, this was designed. We've seen this a few times, almost come before us also. And I liked it as a standalone project. I like it. I hate to say whether or not next door is built. Obviously, if phase 2 is put in, it looks like perhaps more of a complete project, but I think it warrants standing on its own as a project. Obviously, addressing the concerns of parking count and the valet parking program, which I'm also okay with in terms of how that was described, that it can be 24-hour. It can be 24-hour. It can be set and baked into the CCNRs, and it's not. There's no chance of it going away. I'm fine with the residential density, and I am more of a purist on the consistency between the two buildings. I like how 1500 lays out in terms of the depth of the sidewalk and that and the element of the separation there along Mount Tabla Boulevard. And I would like to see that also continue along the front of that. I don't think there's anything magic about the width of it, and I'm fine with that 8-foot unobstructed sidewalk for consistency's sake. So overall, as it is, I'm in favor as it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Reiser. Looks like Commissioner Pickett's ready to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys, but I got a lot of comments on this project. More than my questions, but I've unfortunately, because it's been hanging around so long, I've had a lot of time to study it. I'll start with parking. I've put this in different categories, but I do not find the valet parking acceptable. It relies on future private multi-party organizations to agree to develop it to where we don't need valet parking. I just don't like the valet parking, and I don't see a viable exit from imposing it. Obviously, a couple of our commissioners are okay with valet parking. Although there's no parking required for the rooftop restaurant, it unquestionably will generate a parking demand, and that's not considered. If the parking concept fails, which I believe it will overflow onto the city streets and burden the public parking that's already there and already stressed at peak times. There's a disparity between the parking allocation. I think the applicant's allocation doesn't fairly bear the burden of parking for the opportunity site 2, which includes 2 parcels. I think it's passing the burden on to the other parcel, which will preclude an orderly development in accordance with our specific plan. I think phase 1 ought to be self-supporting on its parking without valet parking. I would consider some of the factors that have been pointed out in determining what the appropriate parking number is. Apparently that's our decision as a planning commission to evaluate the parking. I don't think we need to take the maximum limit. Greg gave us a nice table that showed us different concepts. One is the maximum using the M2, M1 zoning requirements, which is way up there, 145. The minimum is the using the north downtown specific plan and the west downtown specific plan, which are really not relevant to this property. But that would be a minimum, and you got bar proximate. So somewhere in the range, I think it's okay, but what's proposed is inadequate. One of the things we need to find in order to approve this, that, we need in order to, approve the parking is have a clear and convincing evidence that the parking demand will be less than requirement in sections, and it identifies the sections of our code. And I don't have clear and convincing evidence. I don't think that the parking report is adequate. I think it doesn't give us sufficient information for a decision. So building design and massing, I think the building is too tall. I think when you look at the height of the building, right on as proposed, which I also don't think is going to fly, but right on the right-of-way, the 20-foot right-of-way, you got 2 tall buildings 20 feet apart. And you're trying to talk about activating commercial lane. That's an objective of the specific plan, totally ignored in this. you're not going to create activation by having big two vertical walls 20 feet apart. I also think that the design of the density, I would support higher density with smaller units. The units that are going in here are pretty large. I think there are some studios, but the one bedrooms I think are 1,400 feet. The two bedrooms are, I don't know, 1,700 feet. So you're not getting a lot of bang for your buck. We're not really helping the housing deficiency in our community by allowing this project to build large, condominiums on a prime site. I think that I would support smaller units, higher density. A design issue, I can't take credit for it. It was in the design review comments, but the northwest corner of this building is a 5-story or 4-story blank wall. And in the absence of developing phase 2, which is likely not to happen in my lifetime, we will be staring at a big blank wall. So architecturally, the architect needs to do something to enhance that wall because we're going to be staring at it for a long time. And I know design review will talk about that. They've already pointed that out to the applicant. I'm not comfortable with the public art that's proposed. I don't think it's significant enough. Mount Diablo Boulevard is a gateway to our community. People driving in here are going to see this building. It's a very attractive building. I love the architecture. I just think it's too big, and I don't think it puts a big enough draw there, which would be public art facing Mount Diablo Boulevard in a 3-dimensional scale. Let's see. I don't see any reason to support the concession on the setback along Mount Diablo Boulevard. It's desirable, in my opinion. Walnut Creek has a history of doing this, is creating variety in the frontages. If you go down Main Street, which is really one of the most attractive streets, and maybe the most attractive street in Contra Costa County, maybe the Bay Area, you look at those building frontages, and they step back, they come out, they step back and come out, creating a monolithic, narrow pathway on Mount Diablo Boulevard is not desirable. I think that there's no reason to not satisfy the required setback along Mount Diablo Boulevard. Regarding commercial lane, I'm not comfortable with the public safety issue of having no sidewalk along there. Sidewalk that's provided for half of the building narrows down to as small as 4 feet in some places. It may meet 88 requirements. I think maybe they only require 3 feet, but you can't have two people pass each other on that. So even what's provided is too narrow in the pinch points, and it doesn't go all the way back. And I think we are creating a hazardous condition for the public in our community. I don't think we should accept that. Let's see. Okay, so I went and surveyed commercial lane from Civic all the way to Mount Diablo Boulevard. And this is a visual survey. I drove down it. And I picked up 12 buildings that came right to the right, appeared to come right to the right-of-way line. And I went and looked up those 12 buildings, and all of those 12 buildings that come right to the right-of-way line are somewhere between 50 and 90 years old. One of the most recent buildings built was at 1655 Main Street, right across from City Hall. And if you go on the commercial lane backside of that, where they have access to their garage, they were required to put a sidewalk in there. And that's the most recent construction along that area that, pushed the limits, and they were required to put a sidewalk in there. I think we need to maintain that same philosophy today, because it's only going to get worse as our city becomes more crowded. Let's see, the Design Review Commission suggested that the applicant explore additional ways to activate commercial lane. I would fully agree with that. The corner, would be the northeast corner of the building where that radius is, and where the specific plan calls for a wider expanse and more of an open corner there. The applicant is proposing to crowd that corner. Let's see, I got a couple of, yeah, if you look at in the specific plan, policy circulation 1.1, 1.4, and the image on page 6 of the staff report, granted they're conceptual, but I think they clearly express the intent, and the application and the design of this building isn't meeting that intent. With regards to the specific plan, the application doesn't contribute to the activation of commercial lane. That's one of the specific plan criteria. It doesn't assemble the parcels. The specific plan identifies parking as a problem, and this design only exacerbates the problem. If you look at objective in the specific plan of circulation 2, it identifies that, and this application is ignoring our specific plan. The concept of developing only half of the paseo, I think that the developer, if he's going ahead and he's going first, I think he should develop at least 2/3 of it. The reason being, and this is very common in residential development, if you don't own both sides of the street, whoever goes first does 2/3 of it. It's a commercial. I know it's a little different animal, but I think that the public benefit and the likelihood of that paseo ever being developed because of the economic infeasibility of phase 2, I think this project ought to bear a bigger burden of developing the paseo. Let's see, Walnut Creek. Let's see if I can cut some of this a little bit shorter. Okay, so we're being asked, this is still on the specific plan issues, but we're being asked to make a lot of concessions in order to allow this building to go forward. So I don't see that this building provides something so precious to the city that it, would justify all the concessions we're going to be required or being asked to make. That would include the setback on Mount Diablo Boulevard, or ignoring the specific plan objective to consolidate parcels. It's ignoring the specific plan objective of utilizing commercial lane as a connection from Mount Diablo to the Duncan Arcade. Those are, again, cited in policies in the specific plan. We're allowing a significant reduction in the parking where the specific plan says that shouldn't happen. We're being asked to rely on a future phantom phase 2. It doesn't take much to figure out the economics of development, and phase 2 is really unlikely feasible unless one developer comes in, and that's why they were proposed to be, in the specific plan, proposed to be merged parcels. Let's see. Okay. Get on the last items addressing Greg's comments or questions. I don't agree with valet parking. I think it's impractical, and I think it'll cause a burden to the city down the road. The residential parking, again, I would be open to, as long as it's free parking, open parking, self-parking, no valet, I would be open to a reduced ratio of parking to residential units and residential to commercial because of its location downtown. But I think the valet parking is an unfeasible solution. Residential density, as I mentioned, I would propose that a better solution would be more units, same smaller building, but smaller units. That would be better, much better for the city of Walnut Creek. And Mount Diablo setback, I don't see any reason why we would want to make a concession on that. Sorry for that lengthy thing, but I've had way too much time to study this project. And I find there's a lot of things that I feel are deficiencies, and just presenting them to my comrades here.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Pickett. We always value your time. Who's next? Commissioner Anderson.
I'll try to go through this quickly. As far as the valet parking, I have some concerns about that. I was very pleased to, the main concern is that, if you construct parking, layers of parking, they're going to be there for as long as the building is there. If you have valet service, you know, it's harder to know whether that's going to be there indefinitely if it needs to be. And the applicant indicated that that was, you know, they don't have any problem with making it permanent, have it there as long as it needs to be until second parcel is developed. As far as the balance of parking in phase 1 and phase 2, I tend to side with the applicant on this in that if you look at the plans of the parking areas, a huge amount of parking, the low ground area is taken up with ramp trying to get you onto the lower level and then the second lower level. Yes, phase 2 has more parking, even though it has fewer units. On the other hand, as you said, they only have to build a box and just put a hole in the wall and everybody can get there. So, you know, considering that, I think the imbalance is not as distinctive as you might think. As far as the residential parking requirement, the residential density, you know, at first glance, I was a bit concerned about those, but I think the applicant and staff have put together a really excellent justifications for the numbers they came up with, and so I don't have a problem with those. I am concerned about the reduced setback on Mount Diablo Boulevard. I don't believe that consistency of width is an advantage over making one wider than the other. Wouldn't necessarily make one narrower, just be different. But if you have the ability to make one area wider than, admittedly, you know, narrower than you would like next door, you should do it. Mr. Childers made a very good presentation about the residential areas making use of indoor-outdoor spaces. And I think that, you know, obviously the retail people like to be close to the street and have that kind of connection. On the other hand, is the potential there for being very creative, having more outdoor space, even just a couple more feet of outdoor space, and doing something to connect that to the inside of the retail space. It's a combination of kind of architectural treatment and working with the retail establishment that goes in there. But I think that working with a larger setback, a standard setback, if you will, and taking advantage of that additional space to do something more creative would be.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your comments, Commissioner Anderson. So that leaves Vice Chair Kraselic. I see you hiding back there.
I'm hiding back here, Chair. Thank you. I'll try to be brief as well. I think that more residential units would be nice. I'm concerned that we are going to be building too much commercial, that we're seeing changes now, and I think those changes are only going to continue. And so if there's a way to ensure that commercial could be changed into residential in the future, that might be a good idea. It would be nice to have both parcels developed as one big project, but I'm not sure I'm smart enough to figure out how to solve that problem at this time. I think the parking requirements are fine. I'm okay with the valet program. I think there's ways to make it work. As far as the sidewalk in Mount Diablo, when 1500 was before the Planning Commission, I was lobbying for a much wider sidewalk. We have what we have today, which was approved by both Planning and Design Review. I did note at the time that we were pretty much setting a precedent for this reach of Diablo. So I'm okay with an 8-foot sidewalk. It would be nice if it was a little wider at spots. But I think I can live with it at this time. And then I agree with Commissioner Pickett as far as commercial lane. I think some sort of sidewalk needs to go in for that whole reach, and whatever we can do to keep it from becoming just another 20-foot wide alleyway between two large buildings would be a good improvement. And that's it.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. I think that we've covered everybody, so that leaves me to finish this off. So I will tell you that in reading through all the material, particularly the project plans, I got really excited. I think this project is really nice. I think, Guyon, you did a fantastic job with the architecture, the way the units lay out, the roof, a lot of thoughtful planning, a lot of really interesting building. It would be a great addition to the city. I understand that certain things like residential density and the setback issue, sometimes you make these concessions because you're trying to add sellable square footage to a building to make the financials work. And I'm open to that in a lot of ways. I'm not overly hung up, but though I do like the idea of the minimum 8-foot sidewalk. I do agree it would be more interesting if it was wider than that, but again, there's some offset to the financials, the sellable square footage I get. I feel the same way about commercial lane. You know, it'd be good to have a sidewalk. It'd be good to do some activation there, but again, to create sellable square footage, to create that activation on the upper floors, on the decks with some of the interesting elements of the building could be an offset. So those elements I really do like. The thing that fooled me, and maybe I didn't really understand the staff report and the plans, is that this is not a project with two phases. It is two separate projects. And so from my perspective, the phase 2 project doesn't belong before us at all. This is not that. We're being asked to comment on phase 1. I do believe with Commissioner Pickett's comments, there's probably no economics that would make phase 2 happen on its own. And so then I get into what I see as really being the biggest issue, and that is the parking. I'm simple. I build straightforward buildings, things that I can understand. I'm on anywhere from 8 to 10 HOA boards at any given time. I know how boards work, and I'm not comfortable with the valet program. I hear others saying that it could work, and there could be some ways to legally make that a requirement. I think that you'd need to work really hard to get me there, because right now, from my perspective, the valet parking program is a complete non-starter. And with respect to the rest of the parking requirement, you know, I look at the city numbers on this one page you gave me. It says that without the PR air zone reduction, the requirement for phase 1 would be 89 parking spaces. That doesn't count the rooftop restaurant, which I think Greg said was another 12. So you're looking at 100 to 101 parking spaces required for this project. And I believe that I understood you were providing 36. So that's not efficient. That's laughable. So the parking as it is completely unacceptable. There's no way in the world I would vote to approve the phase 1 project standalone with 36 parking spaces. I could be convinced that the parking requirement might only need to be the 83 parking spaces, but 70, no. 70 with a valet program, no. This is, from my perspective, a problem. And if the project wants to move forward, and I really would love to see this built, it needs to be phase 1 and phase 2 built together with a big parking garage. And it would need, I don't feel that the phase 2 buildings need to be built at the same time as phase 1. They could be phased, but the parking garage needs to be built complete and have occupancy available for at least 83 spaces before I would, as a condition, before I would allow this to happen. And I really think that I would want to see for the total project, the 145 spaces that's required. I understand there's lots of new thinking about how things work, but we'll see whether Uber and Lyft survive this and until they can get their driverless cars they've always wanted. So, I have a lot of concerns related to parking. I do think your 121 parking space solution for 2 phases with a little bit of below grade stackers or puzzlers could be made to 145 units. I'm not, in a camp that says all 145 need to be traditional standard parking spaces, but this thing is so underparked. There is no way in the world that I could support this. So that's the end of my comments. But I really do like your building, Guyon, and hopefully you guys are able to work this out with the adjacent owner and this project as a whole project could come forward. So with that, I will end the public hearing section, and we will move forward to the next item on the agenda, which is commission considerations. Commission Secretary, are there any commission's considerations for this evening?
There are none.
Okay, so then that moves us to commission members and staff reports or announcements. Commission Secretary, any of the commissioners, you have any announcements or staff reports?
I do. I just wanted to alert the commission relative to our next meeting. I believe the schedule was circulated via email today. We do not have anything scheduled for our next regularly scheduled meeting on July 23rd, so that meeting will be canceled. But we do have some presentations and other matters to present in August. So we will not be meeting on July 23rd, but I wanted to relay that to the body here tonight.
Okay, Ethan, in keeping with our tradition, you're going to entertain me that night, right?
Yes, in keeping with our tradition, Bob, I will. Thank you for the reminder.
And I'm not babysitting.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, unless there's any other commissioner announcements, we will go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting at 10:16 p.m. Thank you all for the evening.
Good night.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, guys.
Good night, everybody.